Fucking Simon? I muttered to the screen. The cursor blinked back at me from the end of a line of Python code, mocking my inability to satisfy a client who thought minor tweak meant rewrite the entire goddamn module. It was 2 a.m. The glow of my dual monitors was the only light in the apartment, painting the stacks of takeout containers and discarded Red Bull cans in shades of blue and white. My world had shrunk to this desk, this chair, this endless scroll of text. All I wanted was to shut the world out. The real one. The one with demanding clients and ringing phones. I needed a new pair of headphones. The good kind. Noise canceling. The kind that builds a wall of silence around your head. I imagined it. The satisfying hiss as the ambient sound of the city outside just stopped. The Acoustec Z9S. I'd been eyeing them for weeks. Maybe I'd pull the trigger. After Simon paid his invoice. If he ever did. I stretched, leaning back in my chair, and my eyes drifted to the second monitor, the one I used for browsing. And there it was, in a banner ad on the side of a tech blog. The Acoustec Z9S. Silver finish. Sleek design. On sale. I sat up. A small, cold pebble dropped in my stomach. I hadn't searched for them. Not today. I just thought about them. I tapped the side of my head. Jesus. Fucking microphones. I grumbled, the words tasting sour. It was the only explanation. My phone, my laptop, maybe even the damn smart speaker in the living room. Always listening. That's how they got you. It was creepy, sure, but it was a normal kind of creepy now. The price of convenience. I jabbed the little X on the corner of the ad with my mouse. It vanished. I turned back to Simon's disaster of a project. I forgot about it. A few hours later, my eyes felt like they were full of sand. I pushed back from the desk, promising myself a 5-minute break that would probably turn into 20. The apartment was quiet. The hum of the refrigerator was a low, constant companion. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, and was halfway back to my office when a voice cut through the silence. Delivers an unparalleled soundstage for its price point. The active noise cancellation is industry-leading, effectively eliminating up to 98% of ambient sound. The voice was crisp, robotic. A text-to-speech narrator. It was coming from the living room, from the Omni smart speaker on the coffee table. I stopped dead in the hallway. My heart did a clumsy little trip hammer beat. The synthetic leather ear cups provide excellent comfort for long-term use, though some users report a tendency to trap heat after several hours. It was a review. A detailed review of the Acoustec Z9S. What the hell? Tid-a-tay. I walked into the living room. The small, cylindrical speaker sat there, its blue light ring pulsing gently with the cadence of the synthesized voice. I hadn't said anything. I hadn't used the wake word. It just started. Hey, Omni, stop, I said. My voice was a little rough. The speaker kept talking. The integrated microphone offers clear voice pickup for calls, but struggles in windy conditions. Omni, shut up, I said, louder this time. A flicker of irritation cut through the unease. Was the thing broken? It ignored me. It just kept on with the review, feature by feature. Screw this. I walked over, leaned down, and grabbed the power cord. I yanked it from the wall socket. The blue light died. The voice cut off mid-word. The silence that rushed back in felt different. It wasn't peaceful. It felt heavy. I stood there for a moment, looking at the dead speaker. A glitch. Had to be. A firmware update gone wrong. It was annoying, but it was just a thing. A piece of faulty tech. I shook my head, took a long swallow of water, and went back to my office, back to the glow of the monitors. I sat down in my chair, and my whole body went rigid. The code was gone. Both screens were black, except for a single browser window, maximized to fill the main monitor. It was the product page for the Acoustec Z9s from the company's official website, and in the center of the page where the Add to Cart button should be, 2 words in a huge, bold font were flashing. A slow, steady pulse. Buy now? I didn't move, I just stared. This wasn't an ad, this wasn't a glitch. The question mark blinked. On, off, on, off. It felt like a heartbeat. My own heart was hammering against my ribs, trying to match its rhythm. My hand reached for the mouse. It felt like a block of ice. I tried to move the cursor to the top right, to the X, to close the window. The cursor didn't move. I jiggled the mouse. Nothing. The little white arrow stayed frozen on the blinking text. Adrenaline, sharp and metallic, flooded my mouth. I lifted my hand to the laptop's trackpad. I swiped my finger across it. Nothing. The cursor was completely unresponsive. This wasn't possible. My fingers flew to the keyboard. Control-HOE-W, nothing. Alt-F4, nothing. Escape, nothing. Every command, every instinct honed from 20 years of using computers was useless. I was locked out. This wasn't a bug. This was intentional. Someone was doing this. My blood felt cold. The rational part of my brain was screaming about remote access Trojans, about zero-day exploits, but the animal part of my brain didn't care about the how. It only cared about the what. And what was happening was that I was not in control. Someone else was. Then it moved. The cursor. It slid away from the flashing "Buy Now" text. It didn't stutter or lag. It moved with a smooth, liquid confidence that felt human. Too human. It drifted up to the top of the screen, clicked on the bookmarks bar, and a drop-down menu appeared. My bookmarks. Work links, news sites, forums, and a folder labeled Personal. No. I watched, paralyzed, as the white arrow slid down the list. It hovered over the personal folder for a second, a deliberate, taunting pause. Then it clicked. Another menu opened. Bank statements. Jen. Vacation 2019. Mom. I felt my breath catch in my throat. This was my life, organized into neat digital boxes, and a stranger was holding the key. Who are you? I whispered to the empty room. The cursor moved to the Jen folder. My ex-girlfriend. We hadn't talked in a year. The breakup was messy. The photos were not. They were from the good times. The beach. Her birthday. Christmas at her parents' house. Sleeping in on a Sunday morning. My hand flew to the power button on the computer tower under the desk, but I couldn't press it. I was frozen, watching. It was like seeing a burglar walk through your house, picking up your most precious things, and you can't do anything but watch from behind a one-way mirror. The cursor clicked on the folder. My file explorer opened, filled with thumbnails, 100 little windows into a life that wasn't mine anymore. I could see her smile, the way her hair fell across her face. The cursor began to move across the files, not clicking, just highlighting them one by one. img_2041.jpg, img_2045.jpg, a video file, mv_2109.mp4. A day trip we took upstate. I could almost hear her laugh. A cold sweat broke out on my neck. This was a violation. A deep, surgical intrusion into my past, my memories. It was worse than someone breaking down my door. This was someone breaking into my head. The tension in the room was so thick I could barely draw a breath. I watched the cursor glide over another file name, then another. The slow, methodical pace was the worst part. The not knowing where it would stop, what it would open, what it would do. It stopped. It hovered over a picture from that Sunday morning. Jen, asleep, hair fanned out on the pillow, sunlight from the window on her face. A private moment. A stolen moment. The cursor double-clicked. The image started to load, pixel by agonizing pixel. That was it. The spell broke. A raw, guttural sound tore from my throat. I didn't think. I lunged. I threw myself off the chair, landing hard on my knees on the floor beside the computer tower. My hands scrambled at the back, fumbling for the power supply cable. My fingers were slick with sweat. I couldn't get a grip. The low hum of the PC fan was a steady drone. The image of Jen was almost fully loaded on the screen above me. No, I grunted, my fingers finally closing around the thick, rubber-sheathed cord. I pulled. It wouldn't budge. I braced my feet against the desk leg and yanked with everything I had. There was a sharp crack of plastic, and the cord ripped free from the port. The screen went black. The fan died. The lights on the tower went dark. Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. I stayed there, on the floor, on my hands and knees, panting. My chest burned. My whole body was shaking. I squeezed the power cord in my fist. The 3 metal prongs pressed into my palm. It was over. I had cut the connection. It was over. I took a deep, shuddering breath. Then another. Slowly the shaking started to subside. I was alone again, safe. My phone vibrated on the desk above me. The buzz was violent against the wood. It sounded like a trapped wasp. I stared up at it. The screen was dark. It buzzed again. My hand, trembling, reached up and grabbed it. A new text message. From an unknown number. My thumb hovered over the notification. I had to know. I had to. I tapped the screen. The message opened. Just one sentence. 7 words that stopped my heart. Plug it back in. I wasn't done looking. The phone slipped from my sweaty hand. It hit the floor with a flat, final clack. I didn't sleep. I don't think I did. I spent the hours after the text message sitting on the hardwood floor, my back pressed against the wall, staring at the dead computer and the phone lying beside it. Every creak of the old building, every siren in the distant city made me jump. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. But the sun came up. Sunlight, thin and gray, pushed through the blinds, cutting stripes across the floor. It was morning. The world outside was still going. People were waking up, making coffee, going to work. The thought was absurd. How could they, when my own world had been turned inside out? A hacker. It had to be a hacker. A very good one. Some sick bastard in a basement on the other side of the world who got his kicks from this. It was the only answer that didn't make me want to crawl out of my own skin. A remote threat. Contained. Annoying. Terrifying. But ultimately just ones and zeros. I got to my feet. My legs were stiff. My neck ached. I could not sit here all day. I needed to take back control. Of my apartment. Of my sanity. I started to clean. It was a physical need. I grabbed a trash bag and began to move through the living room, grabbing the empty Red Bull cans, the cardboard takeout containers, the old mail. The simple, mindless action was a balm. I was imposing order. I was claiming my space. This was my apartment. My mess. My life. The unplugged Omni speaker sat on the coffee table like a little black tombstone. I grabbed it, coiled its cord, and shoved it into the bottom of the trash bag with a satisfying finality. One problem solved. My laptop and tower were next. They would stay unplugged. They could stay unplugged forever, for all I cared. I went into the kitchen. The sink was full of dishes. I started running the hot water. The steam rising up to meet my face. A normal task. A boring task. I needed boring right now. I washed a plate, then a glass. As I reached for a fork, my eyes scanned the granite countertop. That's where I left my wallet. Right next to the fruit bowl. I remembered putting it down when I came in yesterday afternoon. I always put it there. Keys in the ceramic dish. Wallet on the counter. Every single day. It wasn't there. I stopped. The water still running over my hands. I looked again. No wallet. I checked the other side of the sink. Nothing. I looked on the small kitchen table. Just a stack of tech magazines. Okay, I said out loud, my voice a dry rasp. The sound of it seemed to break a spell. I turned off the water. My heart started that low, heavy thumping again. It's fine. I was a mess last night, stressed about Simon's project. Tired. I probably put it somewhere else. I just wasn't thinking. I walked back into the living room, my eyes scanning every surface. The coffee table, the end tables, the bookshelf. I patted the cushions of the sofa, then shoved my hand down into the cracks between them, feeling crumbs and a lost pen. No wallet. Annoyance started to curdle the fear. This was stupid. I was losing my mind over a misplaced wallet. Fucking idiot, I muttered, starting to feel the phantom weight of it in my back pocket. I patted my jeans. Nothing. I checked the heap of my discarded hoodie from yesterday, slung over the back of my desk chair. I rummaged through the pockets. Nothing. I went to the front door, checked the small table, where I sometimes drop things. Just my keys, sitting in their dish, where they were supposed to be. My search grew more frantic. I was pulling things off shelves now, looking under stacks of paper, my breathing getting shorter. This wasn't right. I knew I left it on the kitchen counter. That specific memory was a rock in the middle of a swirling river of chaos. It was the one thing I was sure of. Maybe it fell. I got on my hands and knees and looked under the kitchen cabinets. Dust bunnies and a single forgotten grape. I looked under the sofa. Nothing. Where the hell is it? A thought struck me, cold and clear. The bedroom. I almost never take my wallet into the bedroom. But I was exhausted last night. Maybe I just stumbled in, emptied my pockets onto the nightstand, and passed out. I pushed open the bedroom door. The room was still dark, the curtains drawn. My bed was a mess of tangled sheets from a sleepless night. I walked over to the nightstand. No wallet, just my phone charger and a half-full glass of water. I let out a long, frustrated breath and turned to leave. I was about to give up, to just cancel all my cards, when my eyes fell on the bed itself. There, on my pillow, right in the center where my head should have been, sat my worn, brown leather wallet. I stopped. I just stood there in the doorway, staring. It wasn't tossed there. It wasn't dropped. It was placed, neatly, square in the middle of the pillow, as if it were a mint at a fancy hotel. My tired brain tried to make sense of it. It fought for a rational explanation. Okay, you were dead tired. You came in, went straight to the bedroom, put your wallet on the pillow for some reason, and forgot. You are a forgetful, overworked person. It felt wrong. The placement was too deliberate, too neat. But what was the alternative? That someone broke in, ignored my $1,000 computer, ignored the TV, and just moved my wallet to my pillow? It made no sense. It had to be me. I was just losing it. That was all. I walked over to the bed and picked it up. It felt normal. The worn leather was familiar in my hand. A small wave of relief washed over me. See? Just a brain fart. Nothing sinister. I opened it. A reflex action, just to check if everything was there. Cash on the left, 420s. Looked right. Credit cards in their slots. Amex. Visa. Debit card. All there. I thumbed to the clear plastic window that held my driver's license. My thumb stopped. My blood went cold. It wasn't my license. It was a photograph. A glossy 2BY 3-inch portrait, perfectly sized to fit the ID slot. It was a picture of me, sleeping, in this bed. The one I was standing next to. My mouth was slightly open. My hair was a mess against the very pillow where I had just found the wallet. The photo was high quality, the focus sharp. It was taken in the dark, but the image was clear, lit by some faint ambient source, and the angle was all wrong. It was taken from above. As if someone had been standing over my bed, aiming a camera straight down at my face. Last night, the breath I was holding came out in a ragged gasp. My hand started shaking, the wallet vibrating with the tremor. This wasn't a hacker in Russia. This wasn't a remote intrusion. This was physical. This was here, in my room. While I was asleep, the thought hit me like a physical blow. The air in the room was suddenly thick, unbreathable. I felt a presence, the memory of one. A ghost that had stood right where I was standing now. I stumbled back, away from the bed, my eyes wide, darting into the shadows of the room. The closet door was slightly ajar. The bathroom door was closed. They were in the house. They had to be. Who's there? The words were a choked whisper. The silence that answered was huge. It filled the room. It filled the whole apartment. It was a conscious, listening silence. No, I had to be wrong. They came in, they did this, and they left. They had to be gone. My legs were moving before my brain gave the command. I ran out of the bedroom, my heart a wild drum against my ribs. I had to check. I had to know. I sprinted to the front door. The deadbolt was thrown. The chain was on. Both locked from the inside. How? I ran to the kitchen. The window over the sink was locked, the latch firm. The fire escape window in the main room. I vaulted the sofa to get to it. I ripped back the curtain. Locked. The crossbar was firmly in place. I had locked it myself weeks ago. Every entry point was sealed. From the inside. It wasn't possible. There was no way in, no way out. Unless they were still here. A new wave of pure, Animal terror washed over me. I was locked in here with them. The apartment, my fortress, was now a cage, a hunting ground, and I was the prey. W-H-O, are you? I screamed, the words tearing out of my throat, raw and loud. What do you want? My voice echoed in the sudden quiet that followed. Nothing, no reply, just the low hum of the refrigerator. Come out, you fucker! Rouse! I shouted, a wild rage mixing with the fear. Silence, watchful, waiting. I backed away from the window, my head on a swivel, my eyes scanning every corner, every doorway, every shadow. The hallway leading to the bedroom looked like a dark maw. The closed door to the utility closet seemed to bulge with unseen menace. This was insane. I was alone. I had to be alone. But the photograph in my wallet was real. The wallet on the pillow was real. I needed a weapon. My eyes landed on the knife block on the kitchen counter. I scrambled over, my hand shaking so badly I could barely get a grip. I pulled out the biggest one, the chef's knife. The 8-inch blade felt heavy and cold. It was a solid, real thing in a world that had suddenly dissolved into impossible fear. Holding it, my panic subsided just enough to let a thought through. I felt like a fool, a man in a horror movie, but I didn't care. I held the knife out in front of me, the blade pointed toward the empty space of my living room. I know you're here, I said, my voice steadier now. Come on, show yourself. I was facing a ghost, a phantom that could walk through locked doors. A thing that could stand over my bed while I slept. The thought was so terrifying that my mind rejected it. There had to be an explanation, a logical, physical explanation. And then I saw it. In the corner of the living room, mounted high on the wall near the ceiling, was the small, white security camera I'd installed a year ago after a neighbor's apartment was broken into. A little Wise Cam. A cheap, simple peace-of-mind device. Hope, sharp and piercing, cut through the terror. The camera. It recorded based on motion. It would have seen them. It would have seen everything. I would have proof. I would have a face. I looked closely at the device. The little blue status light that showed it was on and recording it was dark. My blood ran cold again. I fumbled for my phone, the one that had laid on the floor all night. I snatched it up, my thumb swiping frantically across the screen. I found the app, tapped it open. The familiar logo appeared. Living room cam, the screen read. Offline. No. I pulled down to refresh. Connecting, the app said for a long, agonizing moment. Then, offline. With a shaking finger, I tapped on the Events tab. The cloud. The recordings. It would all be there. A list of motion-triggered clips would load. I just had to scroll back. To last night. The page loaded. A list of short video files appeared, each with a timestamp. Today, 8:15 a.m., motion detected. That was me. That was me running through the living room like a madman. Yesterday, 4:22 p.m., motion detected. That was me coming home from my coffee run. 2 days ago, 9:03 p.m., motion detected. 2 days ago, 8:47 p.m., motion detected. I scrolled and scrolled. There was nothing. The entire night. From 4:22 p.m. yesterday until 8:15 a.m. this morning. It was a perfect, clean, impossible gap. A 13-hour black hole where the evidence should have been. Where the answer should have been. They hadn't just gotten in, they hadn't just taken a picture, they had turned off my camera. Or worse. They had gotten into the system, into the cloud, and surgically removed the one thing that could have identified them. My phone slipped from my sweaty hand. It didn't fall this time. I caught it. But my whole body went rigid. The knowledge settled over me, heavy as a shroud. They weren't just a physical threat who could get through locked doors. They were a digital ghost who could erase their own existence. They controlled the locks on my doors and the data on my phone. They were in my room when I slept, and in my pocket when I was awake. I was holding a knife in an empty room, but I had never been less alone, and never more trapped. I didn't dare to sleep. I crouched in the living room, the cold steel of the chef's knife, a heavy, alien weight in my hand. My back was pressed to the wall, giving me the widest possible view of the apartment, Every shadow seemed to breathe. Every hum from an appliance sounded like a low growl. My own home had become enemy territory. My thoughts were a frantic scramble, a bird beating its wings against the cage of my skull. I had to do something. Sitting here, waiting, was its own kind of madness. I needed a voice. A real one. Proof that the world outside my front door still existed. My thumb, slick with sweat, fumbled to unlock my phone. I hit Jenna's name. It rang 3 times before she picked up, her voice thick with sleep. "Hello?" "Jenna," I breathed, the name a prayer. "What is it? What time is it?" She mumbled. There was a rustle of sheets. "Are you okay?" "No, I'm not okay. Something's happening here." My voice was a raw whisper. I didn't want to speak any louder. I didn't want it to hear. "What do you mean? What's going on?" The sleep was fading from her voice, replaced by a thread of concern. How could I explain? Where could I even start? "Someone was in my apartment, Jenna, while I was asleep." A pause. "What? Did you call the police?" "No! They didn't take anything. They moved things. They left something. A picture of me, sleeping." The silence on the other end of the line was long. It was a heavy, judging silence. "A picture? What are you talking about?" "In my wallet. They took my license out and put a picture of me sleeping in its place. A picture they took last night, standing over my bed." "Okay, slow down," she said, her voice changing. It wasn't concern anymore. It was the calm, placating tone you use on a child or a lunatic. "You're not making sense. Are you sure you didn't just, print it out yourself? You've been under a lot of pressure with Simon's project. You haven't been sleeping." "No, this isn't about the project." A hiss of frustration escaped me. "Jenna, listen to me. The camera was offline. My computer was hacked. This is real." "Babe," she said, her voice soft and full of a pity that felt like a slap. "You lose things all the time. Your wallet, your keys. Remember last month? We spent an hour looking for your phone, and it was in the refrigerator. Your brain is just fried. You probably put the wallet on your pillow yourself and had a weird dream." "I did not put my own picture in my wallet, Jenna. I'm holding a knife right now." "You're what?" Her voice spiked with alarm. "Okay, this has gone too far. You're scaring me. You're just spiraling. You need to get some sleep. Everything will look different in the morning." "It is morning," I was almost shouting now, the whisper forgotten. "And it looks worse. You think I'm crazy." "I think you're stressed out, and you're letting your imagination get the best of you. That's all," she said. "Please just put the knife down, take a deep breath, and go to bed. You're just paranoid." The word hit me like a stone. Paranoid. That was it. The final judgment. She wasn't going to help me. She thought I was the problem. "I have to go," I said, my voice flat. "Wait, don't just..." I pressed the red icon on the screen, cutting her off. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. I was completely, utterly alone. I slid down the wall, the knife resting on my knee. My fortress, my cage, and now, my asylum. The moment the line went dead, the TV across the room clicked on. It wasn't a channel. It was static. A screen full of churning monochrome snow. A loud electric hiss filled the apartment, scraping at my nerves. I flinched, my knuckles white on the knife's handle. My first thought was a power surge, a circuit breaker tripping. Then the voice came. It crackled out of the TV's speakers, a mangled, digitized parody of a human voice. It was choppy, layered, like a recording that had been chewed up and spat back out. And it spoke a single sentence, repeating the last words Jenna had said to me. "You're just Papa paranoid." My blood went ice cold. It was a perfect mimicry, twisted through a filter of pure malice. I stared at the screen, at the dancing black and white dots. It wasn't a power surge. It knew. It had been listening. It had heard every word of my call. My hand scrabbled for the remote on the coffee table. I didn't even aim, I just threw it. The plastic rectangle hit the bottom of the screen with a hollow clack and skittered onto the floor. The screen didn't flicker. The hissing didn't stop. The voice didn't stop. If anything, the volume seemed to increase, the words burrowing deeper into my ears. Just paranoid, paranoid, paranoid. Then it changed. The digital distortion receded. The static softened. And a new voice emerged from the speakers. This one was clear. It was warm. It was a voice I hadn't heard in years, but one I would know anywhere. It was my mother's voice. "Do you remember the little sparrow, sweetie?" the voice from the TV asked. A perfect, loving imitation of my mom. "The one with the broken wing? You cried for a whole day. You told me it was our secret, that we were the only two people in the whole world who knew how sad its song was." I dropped the knife. It clattered on the hardwood floor, the sound impossibly loud. I scrambled backwards, pushing myself away with my hands and feet, crab walking until my back hit the opposite wall. My breath caught in my throat. The sparrow. It was a memory locked so deep inside me I had almost forgotten it. I was 7 years old, a tiny bird in our backyard. We'd buried it in a shoebox under the old oak tree. She had hugged me and told me it was our secret. A sacred, sad little secret between a mother and her son. There was no one else. No one. Not Jenna. Not my father. Not a single other soul on the planet. This wasn't a hacker anymore. This wasn't a stalker who'd been following me for a few weeks. This was something else. Something that had access to my memories. Something that could peel back my skull and pluck out the most private, buried pieces of my life. I stared at the television. It was no longer a TV. It was a black mirror, reflecting a horror I couldn't comprehend. "Who are you?" I mouthed, no sound coming out. The motherly voice was gone. The backquote, his backquote, returned. Louder now. A churning, angry noise that seemed to make the air vibrate. I had to call her. I had to know she was okay. I snatched up my phone from the floor. My fingers were trembling so violently I could barely hit the screen. I found her contact. I pressed the call button. Nothing happened. I looked at the top corner of the screen. Where the 5 bars of service should have been, there was only a single stark message. No service. They were gone. All 5 bars. Vanished. I frantically stabbed at the Wi-Fi icon. Nothing. Not my network, not my neighbors, not the free Xfinity hotspot that was always there. The list was empty. They hadn't just gotten into my phone. They had cut it off from the world. They'd built the walls of the cage higher. I was in a dead zone of their creation. The backquote, his backquote from the TV stopped. The abrupt silence was a physical blow. It was louder than the noise it replaced. It was a listening silence. A waiting silence. And in that silence, I heard it. A sound from outside my apartment. In the hallway. A floorboard creaked. It was soft. So soft I thought I'd imagined it. I held my breath, straining my ears. The world shrank to the space between me and my front door. Another sound. The leathery scuff of a shoe on the worn runner that lined the building's corridor. It was slow. Deliberate. The footsteps of someone who wasn't in a hurry. The footsteps of someone who knew I was on the other side of the door. Listening. Panic, pure and animal, surged through me. I scrambled on all fours, diving behind the sofa. I pressed my cheek against the cool fabric, my body coiled like a spring. I peered around the edge, my eyes fixed on the door. The chain was on. The deadbolt was thrown. I had checked them a dozen times. The footsteps stopped, right outside my door. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped thing. I was sure it was loud enough to be heard in the hallway. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to smother the sound. My lungs burned. Don't breathe. Don't make a sound. Then came the sound that shattered my world, a metallic scrape. The unmistakable sound of a key sliding into a lock. My lock. It wasn't a pick. It wasn't a drill. It was a key. A slow, grinding turn. The tumblers inside the deadbolt clicked, one by one. A sound I heard every day, now transformed into the soundtrack of my own murder. My mind screamed. It was impossible. No one else had a key. No one. My eyes were glued to the small brass knob of the deadbolt. I watched it. I waited for it to turn. For the door to swing open. For the face to finally appear in the doorway. My whole body was a single, rigid muscle, braced for the end. But the knob didn't turn. After a long, agonizing moment of metallic friction, the sound stopped. There was no click of the bolt retracting. No further turning. Just silence. A heavy, profound silence that pressed in from the hallway. I stayed frozen behind the sofa, counting the seconds. 10. 20. A full minute. Nothing. No footsteps walking away. No sound at all. It was as if the person on the other side had simply vanished. The tension inside me stretched to a breaking point, a wire humming with terror. What was that? A test? A demonstration? My phone buzzed on the floor where I dropped it. The screen lit up the dark space around me. A new message. My hand shook as I reached for it. It was from the same unknown number as before. It wasn't a text this time. It was a picture message. My thumb hovered over the notification, then tapped. The image loaded. It was a photograph of my keys. My house key, my mailbox key, the little novelty keychain my sister gave me. They were lying on a strange, pockmarked concrete surface, like a workbench in a dusty garage. They were unmistakably mine. The ones that should have been in the ceramic dish by the door. My blood ran cold. He had them. He had my keys. And then I saw the text beneath the picture. A single sentence. This copy didn't quite fit. I'll try again tomorrow. I didn't sleep. The sun rose and painted the wall a sick gray color. I didn't care. The message on my phone was a brand seared into my brain. This copy didn't quite fit. I'll try again tomorrow. Tomorrow was today. I had to get out. Staying here was waiting for a slaughter. My mind, stripped raw, clung to a single primitive idea. Authority. Police. Blue uniforms and flashing lights, and the weight of the law. It felt like a story someone tells a child, but it was all I had left. I threw on the same clothes from yesterday. They smelled of sweat and fear. I didn't grab my keys. I knew they weren't in the dish. I didn't want to see the empty ceramic bowl. I just unlocked the deadbolt from the inside and pulled the door shut behind me, not letting it click. I took the stairs, 2 at a time, my footfalls loud in the morning quiet. The police station was 20 minutes away. The drive was a blur. Every car in my rearview mirror was them. Every person on the sidewalk was watching me. The city felt like a giant stage, and I was the only one who didn't know the play. Inside, the air smelled of floor cleaner and stale coffee. A thick pane of glass separated the waiting area from the offices. I stood before it, a man pleading for his life to a bored-looking officer behind the counter. He was middle-aged, with a soft belly that pushed against the buttons of his uniform, and a mustache that seemed tired of his face. "So," he said, his voice flat. He wasn't even looking at me, his eyes on a computer screen. "He got into your apartment, but didn't take anything." "He left something," I said, my voice thin. "A picture of me sleeping. He hacked my computer, he hacked my TV, he called me, but he used a voice changer. He sent me text messages." My words tumbled out, a frantic, disorganized mess. I knew how I sounded. "A text message." He finally looked at me. His eyes were dull. What did it say? "He sent a picture of my keys. He said he'd try again today." The officer leaned back in his chair. The leather squeaked. It was the loudest sound in the room. "Okay, sir. Do you have these messages? The picture?" "Yes. Right here. This was it. The proof. The thing that would make them believe me." I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I swiped it open, my thumb smearing the screen. I went to my texts, to the conversation with the unknown number. It wasn't there. My blood went cold. I scrolled up. Down. Frantically. Nothing. The entire thread was gone. The picture of my sleeping face. The picture of Jenna's face. The picture of my keys on that concrete slab. Vanished. As if it had never existed. "No," I whispered. I could feel the officer's gaze on me. It was heavy with pity and impatience. "No, it was here. I swear to God, it was right here." I tapped on my photo gallery. I swiped through the pictures. Work documents. A blurry photo from a concert last year. Nothing. The pictures were gone too. Wiped clean. "Sir," the officer said, and his voice had the same placating tone as Jenna's. The tone you use on a stray dog or a drunk. "It's been a long night. For all of us." You don't understand. He's deleting it. He's in my phone right now. I was practically pressing my face against the glass. Okay, calm down. He held up a hand. I see this a lot. A dispute with an ex, a prank that goes too far. They try to scare you. 99% of the time, that's all it is. They get bored and move on. This isn't a prank. My voice cracked. He got inside my apartment. He used my mother's voice on my TV. My mother is dead. That got his attention for a second. He blinked. Your mother's voice? Yes. He played a recording, something personal, a memory only she and I had. How could anyone know that? He stared at me for a long moment. Then he sighed, a long, weary exhalation that deflated him. He typed something on his keyboard. Look, Mr. Hayes, we can't file a report for deleted text messages or a bad dream about your mom. There's no forced entry. Nothing was stolen. There is no crime here. My advice? Go home. Change your locks. Change your passwords. Get some sleep. Don't engage with them. They'll go away. He has my key, I whispered. Changing the locks won't be fast enough. Then block the door with a chair, he said, his patience gone. He stood up. I've got other people waiting. Go home, sir. Get some rest. I was dismissed. Pushed out the door like a piece of trash. I walked out into the daylight feeling more naked and exposed than ever. I was a crazy person. A man shouting about ghosts in a world that only believed in paperwork. There was no help. No one was coming. I was on my own. The walk back to my apartment building was the longest walk of my life. The feeling of being watched was a physical sensation now, a prickling on the back of my neck. I didn't look at anyone. I just stared at the cracks in the sidewalk. When I got to my floor, I saw it. Sitting directly in front of my door, centered perfectly on the worn welcome mat, it was a small box no bigger than my fist. Wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with a simple black ribbon. A gift. I stopped dead. My heart hammered against my ribs. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. He'd been here. While I was at the police station, begging for help, he was here, leaving me presents. My first instinct was to run, to just turn around and never come back. But where would I go? What would I do? This was a game, and I was the only player. Not playing wasn't an option. My hand trembled as I reached down and picked it up. It was light. I took it inside, closing and locking the door behind me. I threw every lock I had. The deadbolt, the chain. I dragged the heavy armchair from the corner and wedged it under the doorknob, a fortress of fear. I sat on the floor in the living room, staring at the box. For a long time, I just looked at it. Then, with a deep breath, I pulled at the ribbon. It fell away. I tore the paper. Inside was a single object. A black USB flash drive. Nothing else. No note. No cute little tag. Just the drive. Cold, plastic, and silent. My main laptop was a no-go. He'd been in it. But I had another one. An old piece of junk I kept in the closet for emergencies. It was 7 years old, the battery was shot, and it took 10 minutes to boot up. Most importantly, its Wi-Fi card had died years ago. It couldn't connect to the internet. It was a digital island. It was safe. I retrieved the old machine, its plastic shell cool with dust. I plugged it in, and the fan whirred to life with a pathetic groan. While it booted, I sat on the floor, the USB drive clutched in my sweaty palm. This was what he wanted. He wanted me to see this. It was another move in his game. I had to know what it was. The desktop finally appeared. I slid the USB drive into the port. A small window popped up. One device detected. I clicked on it. The drive contained a single file, _surveillance_feed_01.mp4, My finger hovered over the trackpad. A click. The screen went black for a second, then a video player opened. The video started. The quality was grainy. The angle was high and to the left, like a security camera hidden in the corner of a room. The audio was tinny, full of ambient hiss. It took me a second to recognize the location, the cheap art on the walls, the pane of glass. It was the police station. I saw the back of my own head. I saw my hunched shoulders, my fidgeting hands. I was watching myself from a few minutes ago. I heard my own desperate, frantic voice spilling out. He hacked my TV. He called me. Used a voice changer. I watched the whole humiliating scene play out from this silent, third-person perspective. I watched myself pull out my phone, the panic dawning on my face as I realized the messages were gone. I watched myself jabbering about my dead mother. I saw the officer, his face a mask of bored professionalism. The video on screen showed me finally giving up, turning and walking out of the frame. Then, the camera held on the officer. He sat there for a moment, looking at his computer. Then, he slowly, deliberately, turned his head. He looked up, not at a random point in the room. He looked directly at the camera, at the hidden lens recording him, at me. A slow smile spread across his face. It was not a friendly smile. It was a knowing, triumphant smirk. He held his position for a beat, his eyes locked with mine through the screen. Then, he raised his right hand and gave a slow, deliberate thumbs up. The video ended. The screen went black. My own shocked face was reflected faintly on the dark surface. My mouth was hanging open. Then, white text appeared. Simple, clean, and perfectly centered. The final word. The final truth. Back quote. No one will believe you. Back quote. The black screen was a mirror. I saw my own face floating in it, pale and slack-jawed. The white text burned on top of my reflection. Back quote. No one will believe you. Back quote. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. A line drawn in the sand. I was on one side, and the rest of the world was on the other, and he was with me. The old laptop fan whirred, the only sound in the room. A pathetic, dying noise. I slammed the screen shut. The click was sharp and final. Silence returned, heavy and thick. My fortress had been breached from the inside out. My own mind, my own memories, my own pleas for help were now weapons turned against me. The officer's face, that slow, knowing smile. The thumbs up. It wasn't just a stalker. This was something else. Something organized. Rage, cold and pure, cut through the fear. It was a survival instinct. If no one would help me, I would help myself. If this was a game of cat and mouse, I would seal up all the mouse holes. My eyes darted around the room. Every lens was an enemy. Every screen was a window for him to look through. I started with the main laptop, the one he'd been in. I found a roll of black electrical tape in the junk drawer in the kitchen. The drawer that held dead batteries, old rubber bands, and screws for furniture I no longer owned. My hand was steady now. The tremor was gone, replaced by a rigid purpose. I tore off a piece of tape and pressed it firmly over the laptop's webcam. A small black square of defiance. One eye blinded. Next, the smart TV. Its huge, dark screen dominated the living room. I remembered my mother's voice coming from it. The memory was a fresh wound. I stretched a long piece of tape across the small camera set into its top bezel. I didn't stop there. I yanked its power cord from the wall. The small red standby light died. Another eye blinded. I moved through the apartment like a man on a mission. The security camera I'd set up by the front door, the one that was supposed to make me feel safe, was next. I stood on a chair, my fingers fumbling with the smooth plastic casing. I couldn't rip it off the wall, so I did the next best thing. I wrapped tape around and around the lens, a thick black bandage, until it was completely cocooned. Blind. My phone. He was in my phone. He had deleted the evidence. I couldn't tape over its cameras, not if I needed to use it. But I could sever its connection. I disabled Wi-Fi. I disabled cellular data. It was a brick that could only make calls. It felt safer in my pocket. My work was sloppy, frantic. The tape was crooked. There were air bubbles underneath. I didn't care. It was a declaration of war. You can't see me anymore. You can't watch me. Now, the physical world. The door was already locked, chained, and blocked by the armchair. It wasn't enough. My gaze fell on the heavy bookshelf against the far wall. It was solid oak, filled with books I hadn't touched in years. It weighed a ton. It was perfect. I started pulling the books off, dropping them in loud, thudding piles on the floor. Paperbacks and hardcovers alike. The impacts echoed in the small apartment. With each thud, I felt a small bit of control returning. I was making noise. I was changing the space. I was fighting back. Once the shelf was empty, I put my shoulder into it. My feet slipped on the wood floor. The thing wouldn't budge. I grunted, a raw, animal sound, and pushed again. It scraped forward an inch, the sound like a scream of tortured wood. Sweat poured down my face. I pushed again, another inch. My muscles burned. My breath came in ragged gasps. It was in the middle of a hard shove, the bookshelf groaning in protest, that I heard it. A sound from the kitchen. A faint, high-pitched scrape, like a fingernail being dragged across a window pane. I froze. My hands were still flat against the bookshelf. The silence rushed back in, broken only by my own heavy breathing. I strained my ears, listening. Nothing, just the hum of the refrigerator, the settling groans of an old building. The wind, maybe. The windows in this place were old. They rattled when the wind kicked up. It was just the wind. I had to be rational. I had to focus. The bookshelf was my priority. I gave it one last, monumental heave. It slid the final foot, its back slamming into the apartment door with a solid, satisfying boom. Done. No one was getting through that door without a battering ram. I stood back, breathing hard, my hands on my hips. The living room was a mess of books and displaced furniture. It looked like a storm had passed through, but it felt safe. For the first time in 2 days, it felt like a real fortress. My throat was raw. I needed water. I walked into the kitchen, my bare feet padding softly on the cool linoleum. I turned on the tap and splashed cold water on my face. It felt good. I cupped my hands and drank, the water tasting of metal and chlorine. I straightened up, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand, and I saw it. My heart stopped. Not slowed down, not skipped a beat. It just stopped dead in my chest. The kitchen window was a single large pane of glass above the sink, looking out into the night. A few minutes ago, it had been clear. Just a black rectangle reflecting the dim light of the kitchen. Now there was a mark on it, right in the center. A handprint. It wasn't a clean print. It was filthy, smeared with mud and dark grit. The palm was a chaotic smudge, the fingers long and streaked downwards, as if the hand had slipped on the wet glass. It was pressed flat against the outer pane. The outer pane. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. My apartment is on the 12th floor. The 12th floor. My mind refused to process it. It tried to find an explanation. A reason. Window washers? No, not at this hour. Not in the middle of the night. A fire escape? There wasn't one on this side of the building. A prank? Who could pull a prank on the 12th floor? First, my legs felt weak. I gripped the edge of the sink to keep myself from falling. My eyes were glued to the handprint. The sheer impossibility of it was more terrifying than any message, any hacked camera. The laws of physics had just been casually broken outside my kitchen window. The dirt in the print was dark, like soil, like grave dirt. Where do you find mud 12 stories up in the sky? I took a step back, my bare foot knocking over a small stack of cookbooks I'd put on the floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. My eyes didn't leave the window. The handprint was a declaration. It said, "The doors don't matter, the locks don't matter. The bookshelf you almost killed yourself moving doesn't matter. I can get here. I can be anywhere." I was backing away from the sink, one slow step at a time, my gaze fixed on that impossible stain against the blackness outside. My back hit the refrigerator. I was trapped between an appliance and an anomaly. My breath was a small, tight knot in my chest. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move, I could only stare. And then the blackness outside the window changed. For a split second, a shape blotted out the distant city lights. A face. It slammed against the glass, right over the handprint. It was pale, impossibly white, and glistening as if slick with rain or sweat. The eyes were wide, not just open, but stretched wide, like two black holes in the pale flesh. They had no pupils that I could see, just two dark, bottomless pits, and they were staring directly at me. The hair was plastered to the scalp, dark and wet. The mouth was a thin, tight line. It was there for a heartbeat. A single frozen moment in time where a man was floating outside my 12th-story window. Then it was gone. It vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The blackness returned to normal. There was no sound, no thump of it landing, no scream as it fell. It just wasn't there anymore. A raw, guttural scream tore itself out of my throat. It was a sound I didn't recognize as my own. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet, and fell hard onto the linoleum floor. The impact shuddered up my spine. I scrambled away, crab-walking backward on my hands and heels, kicking and pushing myself away from the window, away from the kitchen, until my back hit the wall of the hallway. I pulled my knees to my chest, my body shaking in violent, uncontrollable spasms. My teeth chattered. I couldn't stop seeing it, the pale skin, the wide, dead eyes, the absolute silence of its appearance. After a long time, maybe a minute, maybe 10, the shaking subsided into a low, constant tremor. I forced myself to look up, to peer around the edge of the hallway doorframe back into the kitchen. The window was just a window again, a black rectangle. The face was gone, but on the glass a faint, oval patch of condensation was slowly fading, the ghost of a breath. And below it, still perfectly clear, still smeared with grime and soil from some impossible place, was the handprint. It wasn't fading. It was still there. A dirty promise left on the glass. My breath was gone. The world was a pinprick of light seen through a long, dark tunnel. My back was pressed hard against the hallway wall, the plaster cold against my thin shirt. The shaking wasn't just in my hands anymore. It was a deep, seismic event originating in my bones. Every muscle was a guitar string pulled too tight. The kitchen was still there. The sink. The counter. The open tap, a thin, silent stream of water still pouring out. And the window. The black, empty window. The oval of condensation from its breath was gone now. But the handprint remained. A filthy, impossible stain. A brand on the glass. It wasn't a man. Men don't float. Men don't appear and disappear on the 12th floor. The police officer's smile, the deleted files, the voice from the TV. That was one kind of fear, a human fear. This was different. This was a violation of reality itself. My mind, desperate for a hook, for any kind of frame to put around the madness, slammed into a new thought. This wasn't a stalker, not a human one. This was something else, something connected to this place. This specific apartment. The bookshelf I had moved, the barricade I had built, it was all a fool's game. You can't lock a door against something that doesn't use them. A new purpose, born from sheer terror, moved my limbs. I needed to know. If the laws of man didn't apply, maybe other laws did. I crawled on hands and knees, my body refusing to stand, to make myself a larger target. I moved past the living room, past the wreckage of my earlier defiance, and toward the laptop sitting on the coffee table. My fingers, clumsy and slick with sweat, fumbled with the lid. I pried it open. The black screen stared back at me. The piece of electrical tape I'd pressed over the webcam was a small, black void. An eye I had blinded. Now I needed it to see. I dug a nail under the edge and ripped it off. The small act felt like a surrender. My hands shook so badly I had to steady my right wrist with my left hand to move the trackpad. I opened a browser. The blinking cursor in the search bar pulsed like a weak heart. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. What do you even type? Face outside 12th floor window? They'd send a man in a white coat, not a cop. I typed my address. Apartment 12B. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I added a word. Death. I hit enter. The search results loaded instantly. Links to real estate sites, building management contacts, a few news articles about a zoning dispute from 5 years ago. Normalcy. It felt like a jeer. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning headlines, looking for anything. A fire. A crime. Anything. And then I saw it. A small link from a local news archive. The headline was simple. Student dies in apparent suicide at Northgate Towers. Northgate Towers. That's my building. My heart hammered against my ribs. I clicked the link. The page was dated 2 years ago. The article was short, just a few paragraphs. A 20-year-old university student. A history of depression. Found by a family member after she hadn't been heard from for days. Her name was Anna. I read the last sentence and the air punched out of my lungs. The incident occurred in her apartment, 12B. This apartment. This one. My apartment. I fell back from the laptop, hitting the couch with a soft thud. Anna. Was that her? The face at the window? Was she still here? A ghost? Trapped in the place she died? The handprint. The dirt on it. Had she jumped? Was that mud from the ground below? The questions came in a flood, each one more terrifying than the last. The impossible suddenly had a name. It had a story. The article had one more detail. A quote from a friend, kept anonymous. They said Anna had become withdrawn, paranoid, that she had been obsessed with something she'd found online, something she called a cursed video, a file passed around on a blank USB drive. The USB drive, the one he had sent me, the one that was supposed to have the evidence on it. I had never plugged it in. It was still in the little padded envelope it came in, sitting on my desk. A cold dread, so profound it felt like a liquid freeze being poured into my veins, spread through me. It wasn't just the apartment, it was the video. A curse. A ghost attached to a piece of data, and he, the stalker, the man on the phone, had led it right to my door. He hadn't just been trying to scare me, he was trying to kill me. He was introducing me to Anna. The moment the thought formed, the lamp on the end table flickered. Off. On. My head snapped toward it. The room was cast in a strobe effect. On. Off. On. The cheap metal floor lamp by the TV did the same. Then the overhead light in the hall. They weren't just flickering. They were blinking in a pattern, a sick, arrhythmic pulse. On. Off, off, on. I scrambled further back, pushing myself into the corner of the couch. The room plunged into darkness for a full second. Then the TV screen exploded with white static. The sound was a roar, a deafening, digital scream that filled the apartment. It was the sound of 1,000,000 channels all at once, 1,000,000 voices all screaming. I clapped my hands over my ears, but the noise was inside my skull. It was everywhere. I squeezed my eyes shut. This can't be real. Wake up. Just wake up. Then, as suddenly as it began, the static cut out. The roaring noise stopped. Silence. A heavy, ringing silence. I opened my eyes slowly. The lights were off. The only illumination came from the TV. It was no longer showing static. It was showing a single, still image. A dilapidated stone well. The kind you'd see in the countryside, ancient and forgotten. It was a black and white image, grainy and low quality, like an old photograph. Weeds grew up around the stone lip. The sky above it was a uniform, overcast gray. There was nothing else. Just the well. Waiting. My blood ran cold. The video. The cursed video from the legend. It wasn't just a story. It was real. And it was on my TV. A sound started to come from the TV's speakers. Not a roar this time. A whisper. A soft, airy sound, like a breath escaping. It was a woman's voice. It was broken by a faint electronic crackle. Anna! I froze. The voice was thin, reedy, a dead voice. Anna, where are you? It wasn't for me. It was calling for her. Or was it her? Was she calling her own name? The whisper came again, a little louder this time, a thread of sound weaving through the dark apartment. Anna? The voice was filled with a terrible sadness, a longing. The sound scraped at the inside of my ears. My survival instinct screamed, "Get out! Run!" But the front door was blocked by the bookshelf. The fortress had become a tomb. The voice was getting louder, more insistent. It was chanting her name now, a low, desperate mantra. Anna! 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 This thing, this ghost, it was looking for her, or it was her, lost and confused. The TV was the source. The well was the gateway. I had to shut it off. It was the only way. I launched myself off the couch. A raw cry of no tore from my throat. I didn't reach for the power cord. It was too late for that. I grabbed the sides of the heavy flat-screen TV, my fingers digging into the thin plastic bezel. It was bigger and heavier than I expected. I heaved, my muscles screaming in protest. I lifted it off its stand, stumbling backward under the weight. The whispering grew louder, angrier. Hannah! With a surge of adrenaline-fueled rage, I screamed and threw it. I didn't aim. I just threw it forward, away from me. It sailed through the air for a second before crashing onto the hardwood floor with an explosive crack. The screen shattered into a spider web of 1,000 fractures. Glass sprayed across the room. For a heartbeat, there was silence. The image of the well was gone. The whispering had stopped. I stood there, panting, my chest heaving, staring at the dead, broken machine on my floor. I did it. I killed it. Then the voice came back. Not from the TV. It came from the wall to my left. Anna! The whisper was right beside my ear, intimate and cold. I flinched away, scrambling sideways. Then it came from the ceiling above me. Anna! From the floorboards beneath my feet. From the kitchen. From the bedroom. The apartment was breathing her name. The walls were whispering. The whole building was groaning her name, a chorus of dead voices, all calling for the girl who had died here. It was inside. It was everywhere. I hadn't shut it off. I had let it out. I was trapped in the center of the room, turning in a slow circle, my hands clamped over my ears, but it did nothing. The sound wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was coming from the bones of the building, the sound of a ghost searching for itself. Anna, 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 Anna. In the middle of the cacophony, a new sound cut through the noise. A small, clean, electronic chime. It was my phone. It was lying face up on the floor where it must have fallen from my pocket. Amidst the chaos of the ghostly whispers, the screen lit up the darkness. It was a notification, a new message. My legs moved on their own. I stumbled forward, my eyes locked on that small rectangle of light. It was a lifeline, a piece of the real world in this nightmare. I knelt down, my hand shaking as I reached for it. The whispering from the walls continued its awful chant. I swiped the screen open. A single text message from an unknown number. Just a few words in stark white text against the black background. It read, back quote, wrong. Not Anna. Try again. Back quote, wrong. Not Anna. Try again. The words burned on the screen. The phone felt like a hot stone in my hand. The whispering from the walls, the chorus of a dead girl's name. It had all stopped. The silence that rushed in to replace it was worse. It was a listening silence. Heavy, attentive. Not Anna. So the face in the window, the handprint, the TV, it wasn't a ghost. It was a trick. A high-tech, elaborate, cruel trick. The article about the suicide wasn't the source of the haunting. It was part of the script. They led me to it. They knew I'd look. They knew I'd find it. The thought made my stomach turn over. This wasn't a ghost story. This was a siege. And I was being played. My brain, which had short-circuited on the supernatural, rebooted with a new, colder logic. If this was a person, or people, they had weaknesses. They could be stopped. I needed help. Not the police. They had already failed me. I needed someone else. My thumb, slick with sweat, scrolled through my contacts. Most were just names. Colleagues. Distant relatives. Then I saw the name. Liam. My best friend. My only real friend. He was an IT security consultant. He lived and breathed this stuff. Firewalls, backdoors, Trojans. If anyone could understand what was happening, it was him. I pressed the call button. The phone rang once. Twice. My heart hammered against my ribs with each ring. Come on, Liam. Pick up. Hello? His voice was a lifeline. Liam! It's me. My own voice was a stranger's, a tight, strained thing. Ben! You sound terrible. What's going on? It's after midnight. I couldn't tell him about Anna. I couldn't tell him about the face in the window. He'd think I was crazy. I had to stick to the facts he could understand. The tech. Someone is in my systems, Liam. All of them. I started pacing the length of my small living room, stepping around the shattered mess of the TV. My files were wiped. My landlord's security footage of me talking to the cops? Deleted. My laptop webcam. I think they were watching me. They sent me a USB drive. Whoa, slow down, Liam said. His voice sharpened, shifting from sleepy to alert. Ben, what are you talking about? A stalker? Did you call the police? I did. They didn't believe me. They thought it was a prank. And now they're messing with my apartment. The lights, the TV, they have control of everything. They're in the walls. The last part slipped out. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end. Ben? What do you mean? In the walls? The wiring. The network. I don't know. This is your world, not mine. They're everywhere, Liam. I'm trapped in here. I barricaded the door. Okay, listen to me. His voice was firm, calm. The voice he used when my code crashed the day before a launch. Don't panic. Did you plug in the USB drive they sent you? No, never. Good. That's very good. Don't touch it. Don't go near it. I'm coming over. I'm about 20 minutes out. Just lock the door and stay put. Don't talk to anyone. Don't open the door for anyone but me. Got it? Yeah, got it. Relief washed over me, so potent it made my knees weak. He believed me. He was coming. I'll be there soon, man. Just hang tight. He hung up. I lowered the phone, my whole body shaking with the aftershock of adrenaline. 20 minutes. I could last 20 minutes. I needed to see. The darkness of the living room felt dangerous. I crept into the kitchen, my feet crunching on bits of glass from the TV screen. I flicked the light switch. Nothing. Of course. They still had control. The only light was the dim glow from my laptop screen on the coffee table. I sat back on the couch, my eyes scanning the shadows. Every creak of the old building was a footstep. Every groan of the pipes was a whisper. The silence was a drum beating a slow, steady rhythm of dread. Waiting. Just waiting. Ding. A small, clean sound from the laptop. An email notification? My head snapped toward it. An email now. From who? I crawled over to the coffee table again. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely control the trackpad. I clicked on the mail icon. There it was. A new message in my inbox. The sender was just a random string of numbers and letters. The subject line was blank. There was only one thing in the body of the email. A single attachment. An audio file. _recording.mp3. My blood ran cold. No, it couldn't be. Against every instinct screaming at me to shut the laptop, to throw it against the wall just like the TV, I moved the cursor. My finger hovered over the file. I had to know. I had to be sure. I clicked it. The speakers hissed for a second, and then I heard my own voice. Liam. It's me. It was a perfect recording of the call I had just made. Every word. Every desperate, panicked syllable. I heard Liam's concerned replies, his questions, his promise to come over. It was all there. They had captured it all. The knowledge was a physical blow. They weren't just in my laptop. They were in my phone. They were in the very air around me. There was no safe place, no private thought. I listened, frozen, as the entire conversation played out. My heart sank lower with every passing second. The recording was a monument to my own helplessness. It was a trophy. Then I heard myself say, yeah, got it. I heard Liam's final words. I'll be there soon, man. Just hang tight. Then I heard the click, the sound of him hanging up the phone. But the recording didn't stop. For a second, there was only a faint, humming static. I leaned closer to the laptop, my ear inches from the speaker. What was this? Then a new voice came through. It was Liam's voice. But it was different. It wasn't for me. It was a low whisper, spoken to someone else in the room with him. He bought it. Prep for phase 2. The words didn't register at first. My brain refused to process them. It was like trying to read a sentence in a language I didn't know. He bought it. Prep for phase 2. Then another sound, a soft, airy giggle. It was a woman's voice, light and girlish, and the most terrifying sound I had ever heard in my life. The audio file ended. Silence. The laptop screen went black. I fell back on the floor, my breath gone. My mind was a white-hot blank. The walls of the apartment seemed to tilt inward, the ceiling pressing down. The foundation of my world, the one solid point of trust I had left, had just been vaporized. Liam, my friend. The person I'd just poured my terror out to. He wasn't my savior, he was one of them. He was the Judas goat, leading me calmly and quietly into the slaughterhouse. The concern in his voice, it was all an act so perfect, so convincing, it made my skin crawl. The entire friendship, years of it, flashed before my eyes, all of it now feeling like a lie. A long, patient con leading to this single night. Wrong. Not Anna. No, it was Liam. It was always Liam. A hot, bitter rage started to bubble up from the pit of my stomach, choking the fear. I was a fool, a game piece, a toy in their sick little show. Phase 2. What was phase 2? Ding dong! The sound of the doorbell sliced through the air. It was sharp, loud, and impossibly clear. I stopped breathing. He was here. Rage gave way to a cold, clear purpose. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I wasn't going to cower in the dark. I got to my feet, my movements silent and precise. I walked into the kitchen, my eyes never leaving the front door. My hand closed around the handle of the biggest knife in the block. It was heavy, solid, real. I walked back to the door, pressing my back against the cool wall beside it. I held the knife low, behind my back, the cold steel a comfort against my skin. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to quiet the frantic drumming in my chest. Through the peephole, the distorted, fish-eye world showed a familiar face. Liam. He looked impatient, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his brows furrowed with what I now knew was fake concern. I pulled the chain lock. I turned the deadbolt. The thunk of the bolt sliding back was the loudest sound in the world. I opened the door. Just a crack, just enough to see him clearly. He stood there, his car keys dangling from his finger, a toolbox in his other hand. The perfect costume. He looked into my eyes, and for a second his expression changed from concern to confusion. Ben, you look like you've seen a ghost. I stared at him. I stared into the eyes of the man who had been my friend, searching for a flicker, a sign, any hint of the monster underneath. There was nothing. He was a perfect actor. My voice came out as a raw whisper, barely audible. I held the knife tighter behind my back. Did you come alone? Liam's face scrunched up. He looked genuinely baffled by my hostility. What? Yeah, of course, man. Are you okay? Let me in. He pushed the door slightly. I held it firm. Did you come alone? I repeated, my voice harder this time. Ben, what the hell is wrong with you? Yes, I came alone. Now will you let me? His words were cut off by a sound. A melody. It started playing from the pocket of his jeans. It was his phone, ringing. I knew that sound. I knew that simple, looping electronic tune. It was a piece of cheap, eerie, synthesized music. It was the exact same music that had played from my smart speaker when this whole thing started. The song the stalker had used to torment me. Liam's ringtone. It was their theme song. He reached for his phone, a flicker of something. Annoyance? Panic? Crossing his face for the first time. But my eyes were locked on his. The world narrowed to that sound, that horrifying little jingle, and the face of my friend, which was now the face of my worst enemy. He wasn't just my friend. He was part of the nightmare. He brought the nightmare with him, right to my door. He was phase 2. The sound hit me first. The melody. That cheap, electronic jingle. It was coming from his pocket, from Liam's phone. It was his ringtone. It wasn't a Ghosts theme song. It wasn't some paranormal calling card. It was just his ringtone. All this time, every time that tune had wormed its way through my speakers, it was just them calling their man on the inside. Calling my friend. The world went sharp and cold. The fuzzy edges of fear burned away, leaving something hard and clear. The toolbox in his hand. The concerned look. The drive over here. A performance. All of it a perfect, calculated performance. And I was the audience. The punchline. Liam's face changed. The theater of concern collapsed as he saw the recognition in my eyes. For a fraction of a second, I saw him. The real him. A flicker of raw panic. He had been exposed. The script was ruined. He opened his mouth to say something. To lie again. I didn't let him. I threw my entire body weight into the door. It slammed shut with a crack that vibrated up my arm. His startled grunt was cut off. The deadbolt shot home with a heavy, satisfying thunk. The chain rattled as I slid it into place. Done. Locked. Final. Ben! His voice came through the wood, muffled and sharp. What the hell are you doing? Open the door! Banging started. Hard, frantic fists against the wood. Each impact was a jolt to my system. I stood with my back pressed against the wall next to the door, the kitchen knife a cold, heavy weight in my hand. My knuckles were white. I listened to the sounds. The banging. The shouting. The voice of the man who was supposed to save me, now trying to break his way in. Ben, what is wrong with you? Let me in! I didn't answer. I just breathed. In. Out. The air was thick. My world had shrunk to the size of this apartment, and the enemy was just on the other side of a few inches of wood. He was my best friend. He was my only friend. The thought wasn't sad. It was terrifying. He knew me, he knew how I thought, he knew I would call him. It was all part of their plan. Phase 2. The banging stopped. I held my breath. I could hear him panting on the other side. Ben, listen to me. His voice was lower now, trying for urgent sincerity. I don't know what you heard. I don't know what they sent you. But it's not me. They're setting me up. They're trying to turn us against each other. It's a trick. A buzz vibrated against my leg. My phone. I pulled it out of my pocket. A text message. From Liam. I don't know who is doing this, but it's trying to split us up. Open the door, Ben. I almost laughed. It was a weak, pathetic sound in my throat. A lie. Another pathetic lie. He thinks I'm that stupid that I'd fall for it. The recording was proof. He bought it. Prep for phase 2. The girls giggle. That was real. This performance in the hallway, this was the lie. He was just trying a different tactic, pleading instead of force. I didn't reply. I just stared at the words on my screen. My thumb hovered over the block button. My whole world was against me. There was no one to trust. Fine, I didn't need anyone. Flicker. My head snapped up. Across the room, the TV screen came to life. It wasn't static this time. Not the ghost girl's face. It was an image. Clean, stable, black and white. A camera feed. A high-angle view of my hallway. The hallway right outside my door. My heart jumped into my throat. They were showing me a live feed. And there was Liam. He was pacing in front of my door. He ran his hand through his hair, turning to look down the empty corridor, then back at my door. He looked scared. He looked exactly how I felt. His shoulders were slumped. His movements were agitated. The confident actor was gone. This person looked like a man trapped in a nightmare. For a single, dangerous second, doubt crept in. A tiny crack in my certainty. What if he was telling the truth? What if they played me a doctored recording to make me push away the only person who could help me? Then I saw it. At the far end of the hall, by the stairwell. A shadow detached itself from the other shadows. It was a person. Tall. Dressed in dark clothes, a hood pulled over its head. It stood perfectly still for a second, just a silhouette against the dim light from the stairs. Then it started to move. It didn't walk like a normal person. It moved with a slow, fluid purpose. There was no sound. It was a predator, and it was moving down the hall, directly toward Liam. Liam's back was to it. He was facing my door, typing something on his phone. He had no idea. He was completely exposed. My brain stalled. This wasn't the plan. This wasn't phase 2. Liam was the monster. Liam was the threat. So what was this? Who was this? The camera feed made it clear. This was a show. This was for me. They wanted me to watch. The betrayal, the fear, it all churned in my stomach, turning into a hot, sick confusion. The figure was halfway down the hall. So silent. So deliberate. Liam was a traitor. He was part of it. He deserved whatever was coming. He bought it. Prep for phase 2. The figure raised its hands. It was getting closer. He was my friend. He was my best friend for 10 years. I couldn't think. I just acted. I lurched away from the wall, stumbling towards the door. The knife was still in my hand, but I wasn't thinking about it. I pressed my face against the cold wood of the doorframe. My throat was tight. Liam! The name tore out of me, raw and loud. Through the door I yelled again. My voice was a wreck. Behind you! On the TV screen I saw Liam's head snap up. He spun around, his face a perfect mask of confusion and sudden terror. He saw the figure. But it was too late. The dark shape lunged. It closed the distance in a single, impossibly fast step. I saw Liam raise his arms, a defensive, futile gesture. I heard the sounds through the door, a split second after I saw them on the screen. A wet, percussive smack. Not a punch. Something heavier. The figure's arm swung in a vicious arc. Liam's head rocked back. There was no cry of pain, just a short, sharp grunt of surprise as the air was forced from his lungs. He stumbled backward, hitting the wall next to my door. The figure was on him, a blur of dark motion. Another swing, another sickening thud. I heard the struggle. The sound of scuffling feet on the tile floor. A desperate, wet gasp that might have been my name. Then the sound of a body hitting the ground. A heavy, final thump. And then silence. A deafening, total silence. I stared at the television. The dark figure stood over Liam's unmoving body. It didn't look down at its work. It didn't check if he was breathing. It just stood there for a moment. Then it slowly tilted its head up. It looked directly into the camera. It looked directly at me. A hand, covered in a black glove, came up. It gave a small, slow, deliberate wave. A casual, friendly little gesture. A wave from a killer. The screen went black. The apartment was dark again, utterly quiet. I was on my knees, my breath coming in ragged, shallow bursts. The knife had fallen from my hand, clattering on the floor. He's out there. The thing that attacked Liam. It's right outside my door. It knows I'm here. It knows I saw everything. The wave was a message. I see you. The choice was a physical thing in the room, a monster. The deadbolt, the chain lock, my hand. I could open it. I could try to help Liam. Maybe he was still alive, bleeding, dying. Just a few feet away, opening the door, meant facing that thing. The thing that moved without a sound and hit like a sack of bricks. Or I could do nothing. Stay here. In my box. Safe. For now. Let Liam die. Let the traitor die. Let my friend die. My hand trembled as I reached for the lock. My fingers brushed the cold metal of the deadbolt. I couldn't do it. My body wouldn't obey. I was frozen. A coward. I pulled my hand back as if the lock were red hot. I scrambled backwards, away from the door, until my back hit the couch. I sat there, curled up in the dark, listening to the silence from the hallway, listening for the sound of my friend's last breath. Nothing. 1 minute passed, then 2. The silence stretched on, pulled tight like a wire. My ears strained, trying to hear anything. A footstep walking away. A groan from Liam. The sound of the elevator. Anything. There was only the frantic hammering of my own heart and the ringing in my ears. The world outside my apartment had simply ceased to exist. It had been erased. Scrape! The sound was tiny, so small I thought I imagined it. It came from the bottom of the door. Scrape. Thip. I stared at the thin line of light under the door. Something was coming through, a white rectangle pushed slowly, deliberately into my apartment. It slid across the floor and came to a rest on my doormat. I held my breath. I didn't move for a long time, just watched it. It was a piece of plastic. A card. Slowly, like an old man, I got to my feet. I crept forward, my eyes locked on the small object. I knelt down. It was a driver's license. His picture stared up at me, his goofy, smiling license photo. Liam. A thick, dark red smear of blood cut diagonally across the card. It was glistening and wet under the dim light from my laptop screen. It smeared his name. It covered his smile. It was fresh. It was his. They were sending me a trophy. A warning. A receipt for my silence. A scar. Wrong. I was wrong. That was the only thought. A single, solid block of ice in the center of my brain. The driver's license lay on the floor, a plastic rectangle of truth. Liam's goofy, smiling face was cut in half by a wet, red slash of his own blood. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't part of it. He was the bait. And I had watched them take him. I had locked the door on him. I had screamed a warning only when it was already too late. I pushed him away and left him to die in the hallway. The guilt didn't just hurt. It was a physical thing. A heavy, suffocating weight that crushed my lungs and made it impossible to draw a full breath. Fear was a hot, sharp panic. This was different. This was a cold, endless drowning. I knelt on the floor, my hands on my head, my fingers digging into my scalp. The image from the TV replayed in my mind. The dark figure. The silent, fluid movement. The sickening, wet thud of the weapon hitting him. The sound of his body hitting the tile. The little wave. A wave just for me. The show's only audience member. I had done this. My paranoia, my trust no one survival instinct. It hadn't saved me. It had just made me an accomplice. The silence that followed was the worst part. The attack had been loud, with struggle and impact. Now there was nothing. No footsteps walking away. No siren. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the frantic, useless thumping of my own heart. He was out there. Just on the other side of the door. Liam. Maybe alive. Bleeding. And the thing that did it. The thing that waved. It was out there, too. I stared at the door, at the deadbolt I had thrown, the chain I had slid. A fortress that had kept my friend out and trapped me in. My mistake was written in steel and wood. I should open it, I should check, I should do something. But my body was filled with cement. My limbs wouldn't obey. I was a statue of cowardice, kneeling before the evidence of my failure. And then I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was so out of place, so bizarrely normal, that for a second my brain refused to process it. It wasn't the frantic banging of a victim. It wasn't the splintering crash of an attacker. It was a polite, measured sound, the kind of knock a neighbor makes before asking to borrow a cup of sugar. It was patient, calm, utterly insane. I held my breath. My entire body went rigid, every muscle locked. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just listened. The silence stretched again. 10 seconds. 20. Maybe it was a resident on another floor who heard the commotion. Maybe it was security doing a round. Hope was a stupid, treacherous thing, and a tiny spark of it flickered in my chest. Knock, knock, knock. There it was again. Identical to the first time. The same rhythm. The same light, almost gentle pressure. It wasn't security. It wasn't a neighbor. They would have called out, identified themselves. This was a signal. It was the thing from the hallway. It knew I was in here. It knew I was listening. It wasn't trying to get in. Not yet. It was playing with me. It was telling me it was there, just inches away, and it was in no hurry. My mind raced. What was the play? To make me look through the peephole? To lure me into opening the door? No. It was simpler than that. It was torture. It was the sound of my mistake, knocking on my door, reminding me of what I had done. Liam had been banging, screaming for me to let him in. This was the opposite. This was a calm, quiet promise of what was to come. I scrambled backwards on my hands and knees, away from the door, my eyes wide, fixed on the brass knob. The knocking was worse than the violence. It was a countdown where I didn't know the numbers. Then, the knocking stopped. I waited, my ears straining, listening to the new silence. This one felt different. It wasn't empty. It was charged. Expectant. SCRRRRRRRRRR. Rape. The sound made the hair on my arms stand up. It was a high, thin, dragging sound. It came from the door. It was the sound of metal on wood. A nail. A key. A knife point. It started at the top of the door and began to move downwards, slow and deliberate. It was a sound of pure violation, a nerve-shredding crawl that felt like it was being carved directly onto my own skin. Screw RRRRRRRRRAAAAAPE. It was drawing something, a long vertical line. The wood fibers protested with a faint hissing tear. My apartment was my shell, my box, my safe space, and it was scarring the outside of it, leaving a mark, a message. I could see it in my mind's eye, a deep, ugly gouge in the cheap brown paint. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound was too pervasive. It vibrated through the floorboards. It was the sound of a predator leisurely sharpening its claws on the cage of its prey. I wanted to scream, to yell at it to stop, but my throat was closed. I was frozen again, a spectator to the desecration of my own front door. The sound stopped at the bottom of the door. For a moment, there was nothing, just the ringing in my ears. I thought maybe it was over. Maybe it had left its mark and moved on. Boom! The entire door shuddered in its frame. It wasn't a knock. It was a physical impact. A shoulder slam, or a sledgehammer. The deadbolt I'd trusted groaned in protest. The cheap wooden bar I'd shoved under the knob just an hour ago, my pathetic attempt at a barricade, cracked with a sharp, ugly snap. I yelped. A strangled, pathetic sound. My paralysis broke. Adrenaline surged through me like an electric shock. This was it. The game was over. Boom! Another impact, harder this time. The door bowed inwards. Dust and paint chips showered the floor. The metal chain strained, its anchor points tearing at the wood. It wouldn't hold. 2 more hits. Maybe 1. I wasn't going to die cowering on the floor. Not like this. My eyes darted around the room. Knife. The kitchen knife was still on the floor by the door. Too close. My eyes landed on the corner of the living room, the aluminum baseball bat I'd bought for a company softball league years ago. I hadn't touched it since. I scrambled on all fours, then stumbled to my feet, grabbing the bat. It was lighter than I expected, cold and unfamiliar in my sweaty palms. I gripped it tight, my knuckles white. Boom! A web of cracks appeared around the lock. The deadbolt was visibly bent. The sound was deafening now, a concussive force that shook my teeth. I stood in the middle of the room, my legs spread, the bat held high over my shoulder. My breath came in short, ragged bursts. This was the moment. The final line of defense was about to fail. I was no fighter. I was a terrified man with a piece of sports equipment. But the guilt over Liam had curdled into something else. A hot, furious rage. It wouldn't let me be a coward again. I was going to swing. I was going to swing at whatever came through that door, and I was going to swing until it stopped moving, or I did. Crack, boom! With a final, explosive crash of splintering wood and screaming metal, the door flew open. It hung crookedly on one hinge. The chain snapped, the lock assembly torn clean from the frame. For a split second, the doorway was just an empty, dark rectangle. Then a figure filled it. It was dressed head to toe in black. Black tactical pants, black hoodie, black gloves. Its face was covered by a blank, white, featureless mask. No eyes, no mouth, just a smooth, eggshell surface that reflected the dim light from my laptop screen. It was the thing from the hallway, the thing that killed Liam, It paused for a single, terrifying heartbeat, its blank face surveying the room. It saw me. It lunged. There was no time to think. It was pure instinct. As it crossed the threshold, I swung the bat. I put every ounce of my weight, my fear, and my rage into it. The air whistled. It was clumsy, a wild, desperate arc. The figure was fast. It tried to duck under the swing, but not fast enough. The bat connected with the side of its head with a sickening, hollow th walk. The impact vibrated up my arms, a shocking, ugly feeling. The masked head snapped to the side. The figure grunted, stumbling sideways, but it didn't go down. It was inhumanly tough. It recovered its balance, its masked face turning back to me. It came at me again, hands outstretched. I swung again, a frantic backhand, and caught it in the shoulder. It grunted again, but kept coming, crashing into me. We fell to the floor in a tangle of limbs. I lost my grip on the bat. It clattered away across the hardwood. The figure was on top of me. I could feel its surprising weight, its wiry strength. A gloved hand went for my throat. I thrashed, bucking, trying to throw it off. My hand found something on the floor. The bat. I grabbed it, my fingers closing around the metal handle. I didn't have room to swing. I just jabbed it upwards, hard, like a spear. I aimed for the white mask. The pointed end of the bat handle slammed into the center of its face. The plastic cracked with a sound like ice breaking. The figure let out a sharp, choked gasp of real pain and reared back. That was all the space I needed. I scrambled out from under it, got to my feet, and raised the bat high. The figure was on its knees, one hand holding its now cracked mask. It looked up. I didn't hesitate. I brought the bat down, a final, brutal, vertical chop. It hit the top of its head with a dense, wet crunch that turned my stomach. The figure collapsed. It didn't twitch. It didn't make a sound. It just fell sideways and lay still on my floor, a heap of black cloth and broken plastic. I stood over it, panting. My chest heaved. My arms trembled from adrenaline. The silence rushed back in, broken only by my own ragged gasps for air. I did it. He was down. I was alive. Relief, dizzying and nauseating, washed over me. I looked at the broken door, at the unmoving body on my floor. I survived. Clap. The sound was soft, slow. Clap. My blood ran cold. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't the building settling. It was the distinct, deliberate sound of two hands coming together. Clap. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It wasn't coming from the body on the floor. It was coming from the deep darkness of my own bedroom. The relief never came. It was born and died in the same nanosecond, a flash of dizzying victory immediately extinguished by a sound. Clap. My heart, which had been a wild drum solo against my ribs, stopped. It just stopped. A block of ice in my chest. The air I was gasping for froze in my throat. My trembling hands, still clutching the aluminum bat, went rigid. Clap. It was slow, deliberate. The sound of dry palms meeting in a lazy, appreciative gesture. My eyes, wide and unblinking, were locked on the body on the floor. The unmoving heap of black cloth and cracked plastic. It wasn't him. The sound wasn't coming from him. Clap. It was deeper in the apartment. Farther away. A place I hadn't looked. A place I thought was safe. A place I thought was empty. My head turned. A slow, creaking movement, as if my neck were made of rusted metal. I looked past the broken-down door, past the living room, towards the short, dark hallway that led to my bedroom, to the solid, absolute blackness of my bedroom doorway. The clapping stopped. The silence that filled the space it left was worse. It was heavy. It was watching me. My brain refused to work. It was a loop of static and a single screaming error message. Backquote, does not compute, backquote. I had won. The threat was neutralized. The fight was over. That was wrong. I was wrong. The fight hadn't even started. This was the opening act, and I was the entertainment. A shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows of the bedroom doorway. It wasn't a lunge. It wasn't a sudden rush. It was a slow, fluid step forward into the dim light of the main room. A man. He was dressed in the same black tactical pants, the same black hoodie as the one on the floor. Black gloves. Identical. Except for one thing. He wore no mask. His face was plain, almost forgettable. 30s. Short brown hair. A calm, neutral expression that was 1,000 times more terrifying than the blank white mask. He wasn't a monster, he was a man. A man who had been standing in my bedroom, in the dark, listening, waiting, watching the entire thing. He took another step, his boots making no sound on the floor. His eyes weren't on me. Not at first. They flicked down to the body I had just bludgeoned. He looked at the cracked mask, the pool of blood beginning to form on the hardwood beneath the head. He nudged the body with the toe of his boot. A clinical, detached motion, like a scientist prodding a lab rat. Then his eyes lifted and met mine. He nodded. A small, slow, appraising nod. As if he were a coach judging a tryout. As if I had just completed a drill and he was about to give me notes on my form. The bat suddenly felt impossibly heavy in my hands. It was a toy. I was a child holding a toy, standing before an adult. Fear was a hot thing, a panic that made you run or fight. This was something else. This was a cold, quiet dread that seeped into my bones, telling me that running and fighting were both pointless. Who are you? The words were a dry rasp, torn from a throat raw with screaming and adrenaline. The man didn't answer. Not with words. He slowly raised a hand, and in it, he was holding a tablet. A standard iPad. The kind people use to watch movies on a plane. He tapped the screen. It lit up, casting a cold, blue-white glow on his impassive face. He angled it towards me. My own face stared back at me. It was a live feed. From a camera somewhere in the room. I could see myself, wild-eyed, gripping the bat. I could see the rec door behind me, the body at my feet. It was my apartment. My horror. Framed on his screen. But that wasn't the worst part. Overlaid on the video, in the corner, were graphs and numbers. Data. A heart rate monitor with a spiky frantic line. The number next to it flashing. Backquote, BPM, 178, backquote. A bar graph labeled, backquote, stress level, backquote, filled almost to the top in red, with the text, backquote, 97% critical, backquote. Another graph tracked adrenaline output. It was a video game HUD. I was the player character, and he was watching the stats. My mind shattered. The logic of the world broke apart into a million pieces. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't a random attack. This was a test, an evaluation, a show. Liam, his murder in the hallway. It was just the prologue. The warm-up act to get the main performer, me, ready. The man's lips curved into the slightest hint of a smile. It didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were cold, like a camera lens. The initial response was good, he said. His voice was calm, conversational. Like a project manager giving a status update. Panic, barricade, weapon acquisition, all within expected parameters. He looked from the tablet back to me. The final execution, though, he gestured with his chin towards the body on the floor. A bit sloppy. You lost control. Flailing. He took another casual step forward. I took an involuntary step back. We were hoping for more precision, more focused violence. The words didn't make sense, but the tone did. It was a tone of disappointment. He wasn't angry. He wasn't scared. He was a critic, and my performance had been found wanting. The insanity of it all bubbled up in my chest, a hot surge of fury that briefly burned through the cold dread. "What the fuck is this?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" He ignored the question. He looked at the tablet again, his thumb hovering over the screen. "I think it's time for the next phase," he said, almost to himself. "Let's see how you handle a sensory deprivation variable." He pressed his thumb to the screen. Click. The world ended, not with a bang, but with a switch being flipped. Every light in the apartment, the living room lamp, the glow from my laptop, The digital clock on the cable box, the little red standby light on the TV, went out at once. The blue light from his tablet vanished. The room plunged into a thick, suffocating blackness. It was a darkness so complete it felt physical, a heavy blanket pressed against my eyes. I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. I couldn't see the broken door. I couldn't see the man. The only sounds were the ragged, desperate sawing of my own breath and the frantic thumping of my heart, a beat I could now feel vibrating through my skull. My eyes were useless. My ears became my world. I strained, listening for a footstep, a breath, a rustle of clothing. Nothing. The silence was absolute. He had vanished. Had he slipped out the broken door? Was he still there, just inches away, watching me in the dark with eyes that could see what I couldn't? My feet shuffled backward, my bare heel bumping into the leg of the sofa. I froze, my back pressing against the cushions. I held the bat out in front of me, a useless stick in an ocean of black. Then I heard it. It wasn't the calm, confident sound of the second man. It was a low sound. A wet sound. A groan. It came from the floor, near the door, where the body was, the one I had killed. My blood turned to ice water. He wasn't dead. A scraping sound followed. The sound of heavy canvas dragging across the wood floor. He was moving. He was getting up. I was trapped, blind, in a small room with two of them, one I couldn't see, and one I thought I'd killed, who was now rising from his own pool of blood. My mind raced. Where are they? The man with the tablet was somewhere in front of me, to the left. The one on the floor was to my right, near the entrance. I was in a kill box. I couldn't stay here. I had to move. I slid along the back of the sofa, my hands trailing over the fabric, trying to be silent. Every tiny noise, the brush of my jeans, the squeak of my shoe on the floor, sounded like a gunshot in the pitch-black room. Scrape. Gurgle. The thing on the floor was on its hands and knees now. I could hear its labored breathing, a thick, wet rattle. It sounded impossibly close. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again, pointless. There was no difference. Just black. I had to get out. The door. It was the only way. But that meant moving towards the thing on the floor, towards the sound of that gurgling breath. I took a step. Then another. My arms were out in front of me, the bat held in a white-knuckled grip. I was a blind man walking toward a bear trap. My foot came down on something slick and wet. Blood. I stifled a gasp, jerking my foot back. The gurgling stopped. The silence was back. But this time it was alive. It knew where I was. I held my breath, my ears strained, trying to catch a signal. Any signal. Where was the other one? The one with the tablet? He was the real threat. The one in control. The silence from his direction was even more terrifying. I took another slow, shuffling step towards where I thought the door was. My outstretched hand brushed against something. The wall. Thank God. I could follow it to the doorway, to freedom. I kept moving, one hand on the wall, the bat held out in front of me. I was a mine detector, sweeping for the enemy in the dark. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner trying to escape. Almost there. Just a few more feet. I heard a faint shimmer of air to my left, a slight disturbance in the dead stillness. He was there. The second man. He had moved. He was cutting me off. I froze again, my back pressed hard against the wall. I pivoted slightly, aiming the bat towards the sound. My whole body was a single, coiled muscle, waiting for the attack. Waiting for the hand to grab me out of the darkness. But nothing came. The silence stretched. Was he playing with me? Luring me in? My focus was entirely forward. On the 2 points of danger I had mapped in my head. The risen one by the door. The director to my left. My world had shrunk to a triangle of terror in a black void. I licked my lips, my mouth as dry as sand. I had to make a choice, a final, desperate gamble. A warm puff of air hit the back of my neck. A voice whispered directly into my ear. It was the director's voice. Calm. Close. Game over? My world was a pinprick of hot breath on my neck and 2 words whispered in my ear. A click. And then, light. It wasn't a gentle dawn. It was an explosion. A brutal, chemical white flood that slammed into my retinas and made me cry out a strangled noise of pain and shock. My brain, which had just adapted to the tomb-like blackness, reeled. Spots danced in my vision, purple and green ghosts against the sudden, stark reality of my living room. I was in the armchair, the one by the window. My hands were behind my back, rope dug into my wrists, tight and unforgiving. My ankles were bound to the chair legs. I was a prisoner in my own home. I blinked, trying to clear the static from my eyes. They stood before me. 2 of them. The one I had bludgeoned was on his feet. He had a deep, gushing wound on the side of his head, the blood matting his hair and staining the collar of his black hoodie, but he stood steady. He was pulling the cracked white mask from his face. Underneath there was nothing remarkable. A man in his 20s, a square jaw, dull, empty eyes. The other one, the man with the tablet, the director, stood beside him. His face was just as I remembered. Plain, calm, utterly without emotion. He looked like an IT guy who had come to fix my Wi-Fi. They just watched me struggle against the ropes, the pathetic, futile jerks of a trapped animal. My heart was a frantic bird beating itself to death against the cage of my ribs. The fear wasn't cold anymore. It was hot acid gutting me from the inside out. The director spoke. His voice was the same, conversational. "We thought you actually believed in ghosts there for a second," he said. He glanced at his partner. "Then you thought it was your friend. Humans. So predictable." He lifted the tablet. The screen was on. He wasn't looking at data anymore. He was playing a video. It was me, shot from an angle I didn't recognize, from somewhere high up in the corner of my living room. I was on the phone, my face pale, eyes wide with terror. I recognized the moment. It was 2 nights ago, after I'd heard what I thought was my mother's voice calling my name from the new noise-canceling headphones I'd bought. A voice that had turned twisted and demonic. I was telling Liam about it. My voice on the recording was a high-pitched, panicked mess. "You see?" the director said, gesturing to the screen with a gloved finger. "Pure, unprocessed terror. That's the good stuff." He swiped the screen, and the video vanished. It was all so easy. His tone was that of a lecturer, proud of his curriculum. "The headphones? A targeted ad campaign. We knew you were looking for a pair. We just made sure you bought our pair, the one with the custom audio driver we can access. Your mother's voice? Simple. Social media has more than enough samples. The ghost story Anna told you? We fed that to her. Hacked her boyfriend's account, sent him a link to a, quote, creepy local legend site. Knew he'd show her. We laid the breadcrumbs, and you followed them right into the trap." My mind refused to process the words. Each one was a hammer blow, shattering a piece of my reality. My paranoia wasn't mine. My fear wasn't mine. It was all scripted, a product they had designed. "Liam," I choked out his name. The bile rose in my throat, the image of his body in the hall. Liam was a problem, the director said, his expression unchanged. He was starting to get you to think rationally, to look for logical explanations. "We can't have that. It ruins the narrative," he shrugged, a slight dismissive gesture. "So we removed the variable." Remove the variable. He had murdered my best friend because it was bad for the plot. The insanity of it crashed over me. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't a random attack. This was something else. Something clean and professional and a million times worse. They weren't just intruders. They were producers. "Who the fuck are you?" I screamed, the words tearing from my raw throat as I strained against the ropes. "Why are you doing this?" For the first time, the man's flat expression shifted. A smile. It was thin. It was wrong. It didn't belong on a human face. "Why?" he repeated softly. He held up the tablet, turning the screen to face me again. "You're asking the wrong question. You should be asking, why are they doing this?" The screen wasn't showing a video of me anymore. It was a website. The design was stark. Black background, white text. A live video feed dominated the page. The main feed was me, right now. Tied to this chair, face blotchy with tears and rage, My own horrified eyes stared back at me from the screen. But it was what was next to the video that made my blood run cold. A chat box. It was a waterfall of text, scrolling so fast I could barely read the words. Backquote user 4815. LOL, look at him cry. Backquote. Backquote, Shadow Slayer, weak. The last one fought more. Backquote. Backquote, Crypto King 69. Sent 50 ETH for the mask removal. Reveal, worth it. Backquote. Backquote, Sweet Caroline, is he gonna beg? I hope he begs. Backquote. Backquote. Anon 22. Cooking knife, cooking knife, cooking knife. Get to the good part. Backquote. And below the chat, a bright, pulsating button. A button with a $sign on it. A donate button. My mind just broke. The world dissolved into a smear of meaningless color and sound. This wasn't a test. This wasn't an evaluation. It was a show. A pay-per-view spectacle. My terror was entertainment. My suffering was a product being sold in real time on some dark corner of the internet to an audience of monsters. Liam's death wasn't a variable being removed. It was the cold open. The shocking first scene to hook the viewers. I wasn't a person anymore. I was a character. And my life was the currency. A wave of nausea so powerful it made the room spin washed over me. I was going to be sick. I was going to die here, in a chair in my own apartment, while strangers placed bets and posted emojis. My eyes, glassy with shock, scanned the frantic chat, the stream of anonymous cruelty. Then I saw it. One comment wasn't scrolling. It was pinned to the top of the box, highlighted in a faint gold color. It was separate from the rabble. It was a command. The username was simple. Clinical. Backquote director. Excellent. Now show the audience the final twist. Backquote. The word hung in the air, a poisoned dart in my brain. Backquote twist. Backquote. My eyes were glued to the tablet, to that highlighted comment. The one from the director. Backquote. Now show the audience the final twist. Backquote. The man holding the tablet, the one I now knew as the director, lowered the device. His thin smile remained. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of an engineer watching a complex machine perform its function perfectly. My terror, my shattered reality, it was all just a successful test run. The other man, the one I had hit with the lamp, let out a short, harsh laugh. A bark. He gets it, the man said, his voice a low rumble. Look at his face. I couldn't feel my face. I couldn't feel anything except the rough bite of the rope on my wrists and the frantic, useless hammering of my own heart. A twist, the director said, his tone still conversational, like he was explaining the rules of a board game. Every good story needs one. The audience expects it. They pay for it. He took a step closer. You thought this was about a haunted pair of headphones. Then you thought a stalker got your address. Then you thought your friend Liam was playing a sick joke. Then a home invasion. See? Layers. But we saved the best one for last. He gestured to his partner. The brute. Tell him, Marcus. Marcus grinned. A wide, ugly thing. He walked over to the wall beside the TV, the one I stared at every night. The one with the cheap print of a forest I'd bought at a thrift store. He knocked on it. Thump, thump. The sound was wrong. Not the solid thud of drywall over studs. It was hollow. Dead. Welcome to the cage, Marcus said, his voice dripping with amusement. Your apartment? It's a set. Every wall, every ceiling panel, every floorboard. He drew back his fist and punched the wall. Not hard. Just a solid, deliberate strike. There wasn't a crash. Plaster didn't explode. Instead, a perfectly square section of the wall, the part with the forest print, simply popped inward and clattered to the floor. It was a thin sheet of plastic and painted veneer. Behind it, there was nothing but darkness. No, not darkness. Glass. Thick, dark glass. A one-way mirror. And as my eyes adjusted, I saw it. A shape. A flicker of movement on the other side. A silhouette. A person standing there, watching. My mind refused to connect the dots. It just couldn't. This was my apartment. I paid rent. I had a lease. I had memories here. I spilled coffee on that rug. I assembled that bookshelf myself. It was real. It had to be. My breath came in, ragged, shallow gasps. "No," I whispered. It was the only word I had left. The director raised a single finger, a signal, and then a low hum started, an electrical buzz that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It grew louder, a vibrating thrum that I felt in my teeth. The remaining wallpaper around the hole Marcus had made started to flicker, like a TV screen with a bad signal. The beige floral pattern pixeled, glitched, and then dissolved into static. The static cleared, and the wall was gone. It was just glass. A sheet of transparent, floor-to-ceiling glass. I stared through it, my heart stopping in my chest. I wasn't in my living room. I was in a box. Beyond the glass was a vast, cavernous space. A warehouse. A soundstage. Metal scaffolding climbed high into the darkness overhead, where massive studio lights and cameras on robotic arms hung like sleeping metal spiders. Cables as thick as my arm snaked across a concrete floor. People in black shirts with headsets moved with quiet purpose, checking monitors, adjusting equipment. My world, my home, was a cube of glass sitting in the middle of a television studio. My head snapped to the left. The wall to my kitchen. It flickered, dissolved. Gone. More glass. More studio. The wall to my bedroom. Gone. The wall behind me. Gone. The ceiling above. Gone. Replaced by the cold, industrial grid of the studio roof. I was an insect in a jar. An exhibit. My eyes darted around the cavernous space, trying to comprehend the scale of it, and then I saw them. Other cubes. To my left, about 50 feet away, was another glass box, a perfect replica of a student's dorm room. Inside, a young woman was huddled in a corner, weeping. To my right, another cube, a sterile, white office. A man in a suit was screaming at the glass, pounding on it with bloody fists. There were more, dozens of them, lined up in neat, horrifying rows. Some were empty, waiting, some were occupied, each one a different set, a different life, a different little cage for a different show. This wasn't just my horror. It was a factory, a production line. My gaze scanned the studio floor, frantic now, looking for, I don't know what, an answer, an escape, an exit, and then I saw him, standing by a bank of monitors, talking to a woman holding a clipboard. He wasn't in uniform anymore. He was wearing jeans and a hoodie. But I knew his face. I knew the solicitous way he nodded his head, the reassuring smile he gave. It was Officer Miller, the cop who had come 2 weeks ago when I first called about a suspected break-in. He told me I was probably just stressed, that I should get better locks. He clapped the woman on the shoulder, and she handed him a thick white envelope. He slipped it into his pocket without even looking. My blood ran cold. Every word he'd said to me. Every piece of advice. A lie. He wasn't law enforcement. He was an actor. A character in my story. The betrayal was so total, so absolute, it was like a physical blow. It knocked the air from my lungs. The friends I'd called. The reassurances they'd given me. Had they been fed lines, too? Had Anna been paid to tell me that ghost story? Was my entire life a script I hadn't been allowed to read? Had if. Story. Liam. Oh God, Liam. He wasn't a variable they removed. He was a character they killed off for a plot point. For ratings. The rage came then. A pure, white-hot fire that burned through the shock and the fear. It was an animal noise that ripped from my throat, a scream of a thing that has nothing left to lose. I threw my entire body against the ropes, twisting, bucking, the wood of the armchair groaning in protest. "Fuck you," I screamed, my voice echoing in the sudden silent cube. "Fuck all of you." The director and Marcus just watched me, unmoved. My tantrum was part of the show? My rage was content? I screamed until my throat was raw, until my muscles burned, and the ropes cut deep into my skin. Finally, I slumped forward, defeated, my head hanging, tears and sweat dripping onto my jeans. It was over. The game was up. There was no one to fool, no place to run. The prison wasn't the ropes. The prison was the world they had built around me. A sharp crackle broke the silence. It was a sound I hadn't heard before, loud, impersonal. electric. A voice boomed from unseen speakers, echoing throughout the entire cavernous studio. It was a calm, clear, androgynous voice. The voice of a game show announcer. Contestant 11B, designated Alex. The use of my name and a number, back to back, sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. Congratulations on completing the acclimation phase. The voice was devoid of all emotion. It was simply stating a fact. Audience metrics are positive. Viewer retention is at 92%. Monetization is tracking above projections. I lifted my head, my blurry eyes finding the director's. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. A nod of approval. Good job. The voice from the heavens continued. It is now time for the final round. The final round? The words were a rasp in my throat, dry and cracked. I tried to make them loud, a question full of defiance. They came out as a whisper, a plea. The director offered no answer. He simply gave Marcus a slight nod. The two of them turned, their movements economical and practiced. They stepped out of the invisible fourth wall of my former living room, their shoes making soft, scuffing sounds on the concrete floor of the studio beyond. They didn't look back. I was no longer their concern. I was just the subject, prepped and ready for the next stage of the experiment. The ropes bit into my wrists, a coarse, grounding reality in a world that had dissolved into smoke and glass. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a useless, panicked rhythm in the cavernous silence. I was alone, truly alone, on display for God knows who. The lights of the studio high above seemed to dim just a little, focusing the world down to my cage, my chair, my bonds. A soft electronic chime echoed through the warehouse. It was a pleasant sound, like a notification on a new phone. My head snapped up. In the vast darkness in front of my cube, a screen flickered to life. It was immense, a cinema screen for a single, captive audience member. Me. White letters blazed against a black background. They were stark, clean, and utterly without emotion. Back quote. Welcome to the final round, Alex. Back quote. Seeing my name there, so casual, so personal, felt like a violation. They knew me. Of course they knew me. They had built my life. The text faded, replaced by new words. It was a poll. A live poll. I could see the interface, the sleek graphics, the kind of thing you see on a 24-hour news channel during an election. But this wasn't an election. A question glowed at the top of the screen. Back quote. What should be contestant 11B's reward? Back quote. Reward. The word was a joke. A sick, twisted piece of copywriting meant to sanitize the horror. Below the question were two options, each with a long, empty progress bar next to it. Back quote A. Freedom. Back quote. My breath hitched. The word was a mirage in the desert. It couldn't be real. It was a trick. Another layer of the game. Another way to wring more desperation out of me for the viewers at home. But still, my heart seized on it. Freedom. To walk out of here. To feel the sun. To be a person again. It was a foolish, impossible hope, but it was the only thing I had. Then my eyes dropped to the second option. Back quote B. Meet the other contestants. Back quote. A cold dread trickled down my spine, far colder than the fear of a home invasion had ever been. Meet them. The word was a euphemism. I knew it in my gut. This wasn't a social mixer. This wasn't a support group for the psychologically tortured. This was something else. Something worse. Then the poll went live. A low, humming sound started. The sound of 1,000 rushing streams of data. The progress bars began to fill. A thin, hopeful sliver of blue appeared next to freedom. 1%. It crawled to 2%. My eyes were glued to it, praying, begging unseen strangers to show an ounce of mercy. Please. Just let me go. I'm a person. My name is Alex. Please. Then the red bar next to meet the other contestants lit up. It didn't crawl. It exploded. In a single horrifying instant, it jumped to 20%, then 30%. A digital counter next to it spun like a slot machine, the numbers a blur. The blue bar for freedom gained another percentage point, a pathetic token gesture. But the red bar was a flood. 45%, 60%, 75%. I couldn't breathe. My throat was tight. This was the audience. The people I was supposed to be entertaining. This was their vote. They didn't want the story to end with me walking away. They didn't want closure. They wanted escalation. They wanted to see what happened when the rats were put in the same maze. They wanted blood. They wanted a show. And I was the star. The humming sound grew louder, punctuated by a relentless, rhythmic tick-tick-tick of the percentages climbing. 80%. The blue bar was stuck at 4%. A rounding error. Astatistical middle finger from the world. 85%. The ropes weren't holding me anymore. The truth was holding me. The utter, soul-crushing certainty of my own powerlessness. My screams of rage from before felt childish now. Pointless. You can't rage against a flowchart. You can't fight a statistic. 90%. I squeezed my eyes shut. I didn't want to see the final number. I didn't want to see my fate confirmed in glowing red pixels. I tried to picture something else. My old apartment, the real one, before all this. The smell of coffee. The weight of my comforter. Anything. But all I could see was that rising red bar behind my eyelids. My eyes snapped open. I couldn't look away. I had to see it. I had to know. I tore my gaze from the screen, my head whipping to the side. The movement was frantic, a caged animal looking for any other view, any escape from the glowing screen of doom. My eyes focused on the glass cube to my left. The dorm room. The young woman was no longer huddled in the corner. She was on her feet, her hands pressed flat against the glass wall of her cage. Her face was pale, streaked with tears. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring past me, at the giant screen in the darkness. She was watching my poll. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, her eyes wide with a terror that was not for herself but for me. She knew. She understood what meet the other contestants meant. My head swiveled to the right. The office set. The man in the bloody suit had stopped pounding on the glass. He stood panting, his shoulders slumped, his gaze also fixed on the pole. He saw me looking. His eyes met mine through 2 layers of glass in a 50-foot gap of darkness. He didn't offer a look of pity. It was a look of grim, shared understanding. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a final, hopeless confirmation. It's over, man. They've got you. They were all watching, all the other rats and all the other cages. This was their prime-time television. My fate was a preview of their own, a coming attraction. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't a man. I wasn't Alex. I was contestant 11B, a character, a pawn whose purpose was to advance the season's narrative arc. My humanity had been stripped away, pixel by pixel, vote by vote, until nothing was left but a function, an object of entertainment. The sound from the screen changed. A final, deafening chime, like a bell ringing at the end of a round in a boxing match. I slowly, deliberately turned my head back to face it. The red bar was full. A single damning number glowed beside it. Back quote, 96% back quote. The screen flashed. Back quote, vote closed. Back quote. Then, back quote, thank you for your participation. Back quote. The screen went black. The studio plunged back into a deeper darkness, the only light coming from the dim, clinical interiors of the other cages. A profound silence fell over the massive space. It was a heavy, waiting silence. The silence of the moment after the axe is raised and before it falls. I could hear my own blood roaring in my ears. I braced myself. For Marcus to come back. For the director's voice. For anything. The crackle of the speakers filled the void again. It was the same voice as before. The calm, androgynous, computerized voice of the announcer. The voice of the system itself. The audience has spoken. The words were flat. A statement of fact. There was no malice in them, no glee, only the cold, sterile finality of a program executing a command. Initiating Phase 3, Convergence. A beat of silence. Unlocking all enclosures. Clunk. The sound was not loud, but it was absolute. It was a heavy, metallic, industrial sound that echoed from somewhere nearby in the darkness. It was the sound of a large, magnetic lock disengaging. A sound of release. A sound of invitation. The sound of my cage door opening. The sound was a final, unforgiving period at the end of a death sentence. Clunk! My muscles, already screaming from the ropes, seized up. My head was full of static, the roar of my own useless blood. I waited for the electric shock, for a gas to hiss into my cage, for the cold touch of Marcus's hand on my shoulder. Click. It was a small sound, almost lost in the ringing in my ears. It came from my right wrist. Click. My left. The pressure was gone. The rough fibers of the ropes fell slack against my skin. They slid down my arms, pooling in my lap like dead snakes. I didn't move. My hands stayed where they were, palms up, as if still bound. What good was releasing my hands if my mind was still tied to this chair? It was a trick. Another test. If I moved, maybe the floor would open up. If I stood, maybe the walls would close in. So I sat. A statue of a man who used to be alive. I stared into the vast industrial darkness ahead, waiting for the next instruction, the next violation. A low hiss broke the silence. It wasn't the sound of gas. It was air, the sound of a seal breaking. I ached to turn my head, but I forced myself to stay still. My eyes, however, betrayed me. They darted to the edge of my vision. The frame of my glass door, the one that had been my entire world, was no longer flush with the wall. It was moving, sliding, an inch, then two. It slid open with a smooth pneumatic whisper, a sound too clean for this place. Cold air washed over me. It was different from the filtered, temperature-controlled air of the cube. This air was real. It smelled of dust, of cold concrete, of ozone from the massive lights high above. It was the air of the warehouse. The air of my prison. And it was inviting me in. The cage was open. The bird was free to step out into the bigger cage. I stayed put. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped thing. This was the bait. I knew it. Then I heard it again, that same pneumatic hiss. But it wasn't coming from my cube. It came from my left. And then my right. And then, from all around me, a chorus of soft, mechanical sighs echoing through the colossal space. I couldn't stop myself this time. My head snapped to the left. The door to the dorm room set was open. The young woman stood in the opening, a silhouette against the cheap, cheerful light of her prison. Her body was a question mark of hesitation. To my right, the man in the bloody suit stood in the doorway of his office, his chest heaving. His expensive shoes were on the concrete floor of the studio. He wasn't in his world anymore. He was in ours. All around the cavernous expanse, lights flickered on inside other cubes I hadn't even been able to see before. A dozen, maybe more. Each one a little stage. Each one with a sliding glass door sighing open. And from each doorway, a figure emerged. Slowly, tentatively, like animals coaxed from their burrows after a forest fire. A man in a greasy mechanic's jumpsuit. A woman in a thin nightgown, clutching a teddy bear. An old man in a threadbare cardigan. A teenager with a skateboard under his arm. Each one blinking, dazed, stepping out onto the cold floor. We were a collection of broken toys, pulled from our individual boxes and dumped onto the same dirty rug. My eyes met the girl from the dorm room. The terror in her face had been replaced by a deep, hollow confusion that I felt in my own bones. The man from the office looked at me, then at the others. There was no understanding between us now, no shared glance. We were no longer fellow victims watching a screen. We were variables in a new equation. Threats. Competitors. We stood there, a scattered, silent crowd in the center of a monumental darkness, pinned by the spotlights from above. The silence was worse than the announcer's voice, worse than the poll. It was a silence filled with a dozen panting breaths, a dozen racing hearts, a silence that demanded to be broken by violence. The speakers crackled to life, the sound making half of us jump. The final round begins. The computerized voice was the same, flat, uncaring. A system announcing a process. The rules are simple. The last survivor will be granted freedom. Freedom. There was that word again, the 4% word, the mirage. But this time, it felt different. It wasn't a lie to ring out hope. It was a prize to be earned with blood. My blood, or theirs. A wave of nausea washed over me. Weapons are available to all contestants, the voice continued, its tone never changing. They are located at the center of the arena. A low grinding sound started directly in front of us, halfway between the scattered contestants. A square section of the concrete floor, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, began to rise. It was a platform, lifting smoothly out of the ground like a stage elevator. On its surface, glinting under the harsh spotlights, lay an arsenal. It wasn't a pile. They were arranged, spaced out, as if for sale. A fire axe with a bright red handle, a claw hammer, a length of rusted rebar sharpened to a crude point, a baseball bat, a collection of kitchen knives, from a butcher's cleaver to a delicate paring knife. And in the very center, sitting alone on a piece of black cloth, was a small, matte black handgun. Just one. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. Every eye was locked on that platform of metal and wood, that altar of death. We all looked at each other then. The fear, the confusion, it was all still there. But now there was something new in our eyes. A calculation. A sizing up. The man in the bloody suit was big, but he looked exhausted. The teenager with the skateboard was fast. The woman in the nightgown looked weak, but her eyes were crazed. I saw my own reflection in their gazes. A man in a rumpled shirt, hands still held in front of him as if bound. A victim, easy prey. The silence stretched. It pulled tighter and tighter until it felt like a wire around my throat. My throat was dry. My hands started to shake. I took a half step back, into the relative safety of my cube. It was the mechanic who broke. He didn't scream a word. It was just a sound. A raw, guttural roar from deep in his chest. A sound of pure, desperate need. He broke into a dead sprint, his heavy work boots pounding against the concrete, the sound echoing like gunshots in the silent arena. And the dam broke. It was instant. A single organism reacting. The teenager dropped his skateboard and bolted, his lean frame a blur. The man in the suit bellowed and charged, his size making the ground seem to shake. One moment we were a dozen frozen statues of despair. The next we were a stampede. A tangle of limbs and desperate shouts, all surging toward the center, toward the weapons. I stayed where I was, my feet rooted to the floor, in the doorway of my cage. I couldn't move. My brain couldn't process the shift. These were people who had been tortured just like me, people I had pitied. The mechanic reached the platform first. He didn't hesitate. He snatched the fire axe, his hands wrapping around the handle with a possessive finality. The teenager was right behind him, skidding to a stop and grabbing the baseball bat. The man in the suit, slower but more powerful, shoved a smaller man aside, and his hand closed around the claw hammer. A desperate scramble began for the knives. Shouts turned to shrieks. I saw the girl from the dorm room. She was there, in the thick of it. She wasn't fighting, she was just trying to get something, anything. Her small hands reached for a long chef's knife. At the same moment, another hand, belonging to a burly man I hadn't seen before, grabbed it too. They struggled for a second. Her face was a mask of sheer panic. "Please," she mouthed. The man didn't say anything, he just twisted. He wrenched the knife from her grasp and, in the same fluid, horrifying motion, he rammed his other elbow into her face. There was a wet crack. She fell backward, off the platform, and hit the concrete. She didn't move. A dark line of blood snaked from her nose. Her eyes were still open, staring up at the lights that had judged her. The man with the knife didn't even look down. He was already turning, his eyes scanning for his next threat. Something inside me broke. The shock. The paralysis. It shattered like glass. The world came rushing in, sharp and brutal. This wasn't a show anymore. This wasn't a game. This was a meat grinder. And I was standing at the edge, about to be pushed in. I looked at the girl's body on the floor. I looked at the snarling, desperate faces on the platform. People who were strangers seconds ago now locked in a life-or-death struggle. The man in the suit swung his hammer at the teenager, who barely ducked in time. A woman was screaming, holding her arm where she'd been cut. My gaze drifted past the chaos to the one item no one had dared to grab yet, the handgun. It still sat on its black cloth, an object of terrible power, waiting for someone with the nerve to claim it. My mind was clear. The endless questions, the fear, the confusion, it was all burned away by a single, cold imperative. Survive. That was it. That was the only rule that mattered now. The audience wanted a show. The director wanted a winner. These people wanted me dead. To live, I had to be the thing they had tried to make me. A character. A killer. I took a breath. The cold, dusty air filled my lungs. My feet, which had been frozen to the spot, finally moved. I didn't run. I didn't charge. I took one deliberate step out of my cage and onto the arena floor. My eyes were locked on the gun. My first step out of the cube felt like stepping off a cliff. My eyes were on the gun, but the world was a blur of noise and motion. The sound hit me first. It wasn't just shouting anymore. It was a symphony from hell. The flat, meaty thud of the baseball bat connecting with something soft, followed by a choked-off cry. The high-pitched shriek of metal on metal as two knives scraped against each other. The deep, animal roar of the man in the bloody suit as he swung his hammer, a sound of pure effort and rage. The chaos on the platform was a tangled knot of limbs. A desperate, writhing thing made of a dozen people who had, minutes ago, been strangers in cages. Now they were just animals fighting over a carcass. The fire axe swung in a wide arc, and people scattered. The man with the axe was the mechanic. He wasn't aiming for anyone in particular. He was just clearing space, making a perimeter of death around himself. His face was a mask of sweat and terror. I saw the teenager with the bat. He used it defensively, jabbing it at anyone who got close, his young face pale and streaked with dirt. He looked like a cornered rat. The man in the suit was a juggernaut. He shoved a smaller woman to the ground and brought the hammer down, not on her, but on the concrete next to her head. The impact sent chips of stone flying. It was a warning, a claim of territory. She scrambled away on all fours, sobbing. The body of the girl from the dorm room was still on the floor, a forgotten casualty. People stepped over her, around her, their feet scuffing the concrete inches from her open, staring eyes. No one looked at her. No one cared. She was already part of the scenery. My plan to get the gun vanished. It was a fool's errand, a suicide run into the heart of the storm. My body reacted before my brain did. My feet, which had taken that one brave step forward, now took 2 steps back. Then 3. I retreated into the one place that felt familiar, the only place that felt like mine. I backed into my glass cube, my prison, my cage. Now it was a foxhole. I stood there, just inside the open doorway, my back against the far wall. The sounds were slightly muffled in here, the raw edges sanded off just enough for me to think. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I was watching a riot through a window. These people were going to kill each other. Maybe I could just wait. Let them thin the herd. It was a coward's thought, and I didn't care. Survival wasn't pretty. That's when I saw him notice me. He was a man I hadn't paid attention to before. A thick man in a sweat-stained gray t-shirt. He hadn't gotten a primary weapon from the platform. He'd been too slow. But in his right hand he held a length of rusted steel pipe, probably torn from some scaffolding in the dark corners of the warehouse. His knuckles were white around it. He had a smear of blood on his cheek, not his own. He stood on the edge of the chaos, his chest heaving. His eyes scanned the arena. They passed over the brawling figures, over the dead girl, and then they locked onto me. On me. Hiding in my box, the man who had retreated. His eyes narrowed. In his feral, desperate mind, an equation solved itself. The others were armed and fighting. They were a risk. I was not. I was a target. I was a resource. Kill me. Take my cube. A defensible spot. He didn't shout. He didn't make a show of it. He just brought his left hand up and pointed the pipe at me. A silent declaration. Then he started walking. A steady, deliberate pace, directly toward my cube. Shit. My eyes darted around my small glass world. There was nothing. A chair bolted to the floor. A toilet and sink. And the shattered remains of the television I had broken earlier. That was it. No weapons, no escape. The back wall was solid metal. The sliding door was my only exit, and a killer was walking toward it. His boots were heavy on the concrete. Thump, thump, thump. Each step was a hammer blow against my courage. The roaring of the main fight seemed to fade away. The world shrank to the space between me and him. To the 20 yards of open floor he was now crossing. 10 yards. His face became clearer. His teeth were gritted. His eyes weren't filled with malice or glee. They were empty, primal, the eyes of a predator that needs to eat. He wasn't doing this because he hated me. He was doing this because I was in his way. That was somehow worse. 5 yards. I could see the rust on the pipe. I could see the frayed threads on his shirt. I pressed myself harder against the back wall, as if I could melt through the steel. My breath caught in my throat. My mind screamed commands my body couldn't obey. Run, fight, do something. I was frozen, a statue of pure fear. He was at the doorway now. He stopped, filling the frame. He was bigger up close. He raised the pipe. That broke the spell. The pipe swung, a blur of rusted metal. I didn't dodge. I collapsed. I threw myself sideways, hitting the floor hard. My shoulder screamed in protest. A sound like a gunshot exploded next to my ear. Crack! The glass wall I had been leaning against a second ago was no longer clear. A spider web of fractures erupted from a single point of impact. The sound was deafening inside the cube. It rang in my ears, sharp and painful. The man grunted, surprised I had moved. He yanked the pipe back for another swing. There was no time, no thought, just instinct. My right hand, scrabbling against the floor for purchase, closed around something. It was sharp, jagged, heavy, the broken screen of the TV. A thick shard of glass and black plastic, the size of my hand. He lunged forward, into the cube, his arm pulling back to bring the pipe down on my head. He was a black silhouette against the harsh lights of the arena, a monster in my doorway. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I acted. As he brought the pipe down, I pushed up from the floor, a single coiled motion of pure desperation. I wasn't aiming for his head or his chest. I just lunged forward and up, into his body, putting all my weight behind the piece of glass in my hand. I felt it connect. There was a moment of resistance, a tough, leathery give, then a soft, wet puncture. I had aimed for his gut, but in the frantic movement, my hand had gone higher. It sank into the soft part of his throat. The sound he made wasn't a scream. It was a gurgle, a hot, wet noise that vibrated up my arm. A hot spray hit my face. It was coppery and thick. My eyes snapped shut on reflex. I pushed harder, a raw, mindless part of me taking over completely. The man's forward momentum carried him onto the shard. Driving it deeper, his hands flew to his neck. The pipe clattered to the floor beside me. His fingers clawed at my hand, at the glass embedded in his flesh. They were strong, but panicked. I felt his body go limp, his weight suddenly immense. We fell together in a clumsy heap, him on top of me. The gurgling sound got louder. Then it became a wet wheezing. His body twitched once, twice. A final, shuddering spasm. Then he was just dead weight. I lay there for a second, pinned beneath him, the warmth of his blood soaking through my shirt. The roaring of the arena came flooding back in. It hadn't stopped. No one had noticed. No one had cared. Our little life-or-death drama was just a sideshow. I shoved. I grunted with the effort, pushing the body off me. It rolled onto its back with a heavy thud. The eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling of my cube. The shard of my television was still sticking out of his throat, a grotesque monument to my survival. My breath came in ragged, tearing gasps. I scrambled backwards on my hands and knees until my back hit the far wall again. I sat there, on the floor, panting. I looked at the body, then at my hands. They were shaking violently. They were covered in his blood. It was warm and tacky, already starting to dry. I killed him. The thought was simple, factual. It didn't feel real. I killed a man. I looked past the corpse, out the doorway of my cube. The fight was still raging. The man in the suit now had the fire axe. The mechanic was on the ground, his head a bloody mess. The teenager was backed against a wall, using his bat to fend off two other contestants armed with knives. The number of players was shrinking. The game was progressing. My gaze moved up, past the fighters, past the brutal stage. I looked up at the grid of spotlights, into the impenetrable darkness of the rafters. And I saw it, a small red light. It was on a camera, mounted on a remote-controlled rig that was gliding silently through the air. It was pointed directly at me. The red eye was lit. It was filming. It had seen everything. The retreat. The fear. The killing. I stared at it. The eye of the audience. The eye of the director. The unblinking, uncaring witness. And as I stared into that little red dot, something inside me shifted. The shaking in my hands stopped. The ragged gasps of my breath smoothed out. The terror that had been a block of ice in my chest for hours began to melt. Not into relief, but into something else. Something cold and hard. They wanted a show. They wanted a winner. They had tried to break me, to turn me into a statistic on a screen. They had succeeded. I looked from the dead man at my feet to the blood on my hands and then back to the camera. My face, which had been a mask of panic, went blank. The fear was gone. The shock was gone. There was nothing there now. Just an emptiness. A stillness. I was no longer the man in the rumpled shirt who had been dragged into this nightmare. I was a contestant. I was a survivor. I was a killer. The camera zoomed in. I didn't flinch. I just held its gaze. Let them watch. Let them see what they had made.